We are back, baby. We're back. Twitter has reinstalled my account. Thankfully, it's only taken, I don't know, what, 2 months? So there's that. And more interestingly, 40K. You all have made it possible to hit 40K. I, in fact, not just hit 40K, blew through 40K. Hit 40K yesterday, and we are now at 40,300. We didn't just hit 40K, we hit it, broke through it, and kept going. So, thank you, all of you. I deeply appreciate it. Our next stop is 50K. Our next stop is 50K. And let's try to hit 50K before my birthday. My birthday is August 31st. Let's try to hit 50K before my birthday. I want that to be a constant refrain. I want that to be on everybody's mind. I want that to be ever present. When you are having sex with your girlfriend or wife, I want you to think Jamal needs to hit 50K. When you're playing your Xbox and you're about to hit the shot, Jamal needs to hit 50K. When you're playing basketball, Jamal needs to hit 50K. When you're hollering at a woman as she's walking by, if you're a construction worker, I also want on your mind, Jamal needs to hit 50K. 50K, 50K. That is the next goalpost. Thank all of you. Thank you. Deeply appreciate it. We have a damn good show for you today. Glenn Diesen is going to be on in a couple of minutes. We also have Mark Frost. Mark Frost, he watches the show, which I always appreciate, especially for a learned man like himself. And he is going to have a conversation about the tariff war that Donald Trump is enacting. Trump has put tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China, 20% on China, 25% on Mexico and Canada. And it is also an expectation that he's going to do the same thing at some point to Europe. So Frost, an economist, professor, drummer, consultant, Eagle Scout, Marine, Schuptenarian, he is going to give his take on that issue. He's also probably going to give his take on BRICS. Him and I have a difference of opinion on that, but I have a difference of opinion with Ritter on BRICS also. So there's that. In addition to him, KJ No is going to be on the show. Now, KJ is going to talk about sanctions in one part, but also this pivot to the Pacific that Trump is doing. And part of that pivot is getting rid of sanctions and everything else on Russia in order to focus on China. But my guest is here, and I want to bring him in. I don't want him to have to wait. Give me 1 second. Let me get this and this. And my man, Glenn Diesen. Glenn Diesen is a Norwegian political scientist. He is a professor at the University of Southeastern Norway. Glenn, thank you for joining me, man. How you doing today?
Oh, very good. Yeah, it's good to see you again.
Oh, thank you. What is Trump doing and why? Meaning, at this point, he is apparently pulled military aid. He is putting screws to Zelensky. He told him during the meeting, I have empowered you to be a tough guy, which when he said that, my first thought was, okay, Trump is going to cut aid. If he's empowering him to be a tough guy, he needs him to not be a tough guy in order to try to get a deal. He gave his speech yesterday to both halls of Congress. Give me your take on what he's doing and why.
Well, from what we watched in the Oval Office, I think it was very clear that he wanted, well, he said many times he wants the war to come to an end. So when Zelensky came, they were talking him, they wanted to talk to him into accepting negotiations to start to bring this war to an end. And obviously, Zelensky, he kept pushing back against this by instead, invoking all this language that the Russians are evil and again, signaling that there's no possibility to have peace. Indeed, that's when the clash began, when Vance suggested, listen, we have to do diplomacy. And Zelensky started talking a bit down to him, suggesting, what kind of diplomacy do you think you can do with Russians? He was very hostile. And I've been also told that Trump had asked him to wear a suit before he comes, just to signal that, because he wears his war costume during conflict, so it would be a nice symbol that he puts on his suit and he's prepared to that this is him signaling that now it's time to bring this to an end. But he didn't. He was pushing back against this. Even later on, Zelensky was making the arguments that this war will last for a long, long time. So and Trump keeps pushing back, saying like this. I hope this is wrong because we won't accept it. And I think this was the argument of Trump. The only reason why Zelensky can continue to resist negotiations because the Americans are giving him the weapons that he needs to fight. So why would the U.S. do this if he's going to defy the Americans in pushing him to negotiate? Then why should the U.S. enable him to defy the Americans? So this is kind of the logic behind it. Trump decided to cut the military aid to Ukraine, and this will force Zelensky to return because the Europeans, they don't have much at all. This is America's NATO. The Europeans can't fill America's shoes. So this is, as Trump suggested in the Oval Office, we are holding all the cards here. You can't come here and put pressure on us. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Why do you think Zelensky did that? Like, do you think? Because from my point of view, it's like, okay, clearly you're not going to go after the president in the Oval Office. But apparently he thought he could. And I guess my take is, and I know you can't get into Zelensky's mind, fair enough. But do you think there was a strategy at work, or Zelensky just couldn't control himself? I mean, Lindsey Graham said that he talked to Zelensky that morning and effectively told him, go in, shut up, take the deal. And Zelensky didn't do that. He did a complete 180.
No, he did not. And I think maybe he wanted to manipulate the way in. That is, if you, again, look at the language he said when he was arguing that, he brought this picture saying that, the Russians are all war criminals, they broke every deal, you can't trust them. Some of those stories told were lies, by the way, because the Russians did accept the prisoner exchange. So, but anyways, if you can make the opponent buy into this narrative that the other side is all evil and bad, then you have to also buy into the narrative that it's very difficult to make peace with such a bad actor. But this is also why the Americans were pushing back against this. For example, the US actually voted with the Russians at the United Nations because the Americans said we don't want to put all the blame on Russia because this is not conducive if you want to bring the two parties together to make a compromise. You can't have one villain and one victim and then expect a compromise. So this is what the Americans were pushing for. And I think this is why Zelensky tried to manipulate by pushing this very aggressive rhetoric, which is why Trump said, this guy, he's got so much hate for the Russians. I mean, this is, he wanted to push back against this, that this was something about Zelensky as opposed to the actual situation. Now, why Zelensky would take this huge risk and behave in this manner in front of the American president, especially Trump, it's hard to say. On the other hand, for the past 3 years, no matter where he goes, he's treated as royalty. He's the new Churchill. He's celebrated, indeed. When he goes to Europe, you see there's nothing he can say that's wrong. And indeed, this was kind of the deal he was sold 3 years ago as well. Keep in mind that at the Istanbul Agreement, the Russians and Ukrainians were very close to a deal. And it was the Americans and the British who convinced him not to take the deal. And from what I understand is more or less the deal was if you throw this peace agreement away and choose war, then NATO will give you all the weapons you need to defeat the Russians. And of course, we'll do what we always do with the good guys, which is to build them up in the media, give you a nice propaganda campaign, make you the next Churchill. So he was kind of used to going around getting whatever he wanted. So I guess he didn't expect this fierce pushback from Trump and Vance. But again, this is them putting pressure on Zelensky. They're telling him now it's time to end the war. So they're putting all the pressure.
You know what's wild about it? One of the most interesting things in the whiplash that I think myself and people who are analyzing this felt is the change in language. For like the last 3 years, Joe Biden ran with this just grotesque propaganda, unprovoked war in Ukraine. Russia's trying to take over all of Europe. And Europe ran along with us also. It's saying the exact same thing. Oh, we're with you for as long as it takes. And Trump gets in and immediately is like, well, this was not unprovoked. And not just not unprovoked, this was never going to be accepted. Ukraine was never going to be accepted in it. Like, it is a sharp demarcation point in the language. And I guess part of it is because you need the language to change. You're going to make some kind of agreement or deal. Europe hasn't gotten the memo though. And they're still in this same rhetoric of unprovoked war of aggression. Putin wants to take off all of Europe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're going with this idea of trying to get Trump to do a backstop. And up to this point, Trump has effectively said no. Now, the mineral deal, Zelensky has come out and said, okay, we'll sign the deal. We'll sign the deal. just please, God, we'll sign the deal. Why is the mineral deal important in the context of ending the war?
Well, first, let me just say very quickly that this the reason why Trump said that the war is now provoked, NATO provoked it by threatening to expand into Ukraine, is because once you say that the war is provoked, it's a bit like the rhetoric that Zelensky had in the Oval Office. That is, it's one is good, one is bad. Now, right. once you said the war is unprovoked, this means any compromise is now appeasement. You're emboldening the adversary to take even more territory, to be more aggressive. You're rewarding unprovoked expansionist behavior. Now, if you're recognizing that it was provoked, now you opened the space for making a compromise. Okay, we won't push NATO, you do this, and now we can have a peace. So moving away from the unprovoked narrative is imperative if you want to actually reach a peace. Oh, sorry, I forgot your question.
The mineral deal. So
mineral deal. Sorry.
Yeah, because Zelensky has come out, and the entire point of him going there was to sign the deal. And Europe kept saying, sign the deal. Lindsey Graham, sign the deal. Everybody's telling him, sign the deal. And in Zelensky's mind, he's like, well, I want security guarantees. And it doesn't seem like he quite get that the mineral deal is indirect security guarantees, right? I mean, but give me your take on this.
Well, it is intended to be a security guarantee. This is how it's sold, at least. Now, the main idea is the Americans are not going to go to war against Russia, but by having very long-term economic interest for the United States in Ukraine, this would make the Russians effectively think twice before they would invade Russia. And it's not as if the Americans can just put their hand in the ground, take it up, and leave. This is the mining processes, the processing of it. This is going to be a process which will take a very long time. We might be talking decades here. So this is something that creates economic incentives for the United States to have a stable Ukraine that's not in war. So so this was considered to be the security guarantee. Now you can ask, yes, will the Americans get a lot of economic benefits? Yeah, I think obviously. Is this a good security guarantee? No, not really. But it is the best one there is, because people keep throwing out the idea of security guarantees. It's wonderful. Now we can deter the Russians. But keep in mind that Russia considers this, the reason it invaded was they consider this to be an existential threat. That is, they knew that this could end up in a war with NATO. They knew this could escalate into a nuclear war. But the way they see it, if they didn't roll back NATO now, the country might cease to exist, because this was seen as a bridgehead for the NATO countries into Russia. So this is it's not a great security guarantee, but again, it is the best one, because the worst thing you want to do in any peace agreement is to give any of the sides an incentive to restart hostilities. Yes, you're deterring the Russians. They don't want to invade anymore, but you're giving the Ukrainians all the incentives in the world to restart the conflict. Again, Zelensky has been very clear. I want all the territory back, including Crimea. Well, you're not going to be able to do that with your own army. However, if he has security guarantees from the United States, if war would restart now, suddenly you would have a very powerful U.S. army on your side, which could be used towards retaking your territories. So it will almost be foolish not to restart the conflict if the Americans give security guarantees. So it's not as simple as we support you, and the rhetoric which is used, especially in Europe, is becoming so cartoonish that there's no scrutiny anymore.
Yeah, it's childish. I am shocked by it, to be frankly honest with you. It is so detached from reality. Like, the notion that this was unprovoked is nonsense. The idea that Putin was going to take 150,000 troops and take all of Europe is nonsense. It's like there's a level of dishonesty that is built into the entire narrative in Europe associated with this. Why? I don't quite get this. I mean, for one, it's against European interests to not use Russian oil. They've been buying Russian gas hand over fist, even if it's through third-party buyers. They've been damaging their own economies. What is the gain for Europe out of this? I get the gain for America out of this. I mean, we destroyed the pipeline, so we get to sell our oil, our gas, in a way, our LNG to Europe for more expensive. Europe buys our weapons in order to give to Ukraine. Like, meaning, I get what America gets out of this. What does Europe get out of this? This seems to just be a loss for Europe all the way through.
Well, I think there's some geostrategic ideas, there's some ideology, and there's a heavy dose of Russophobia. Now, the main idea after the Cold War was we're going to establish an international order based on collective hegemony. You would have the US and EU stand side by side, and this would be the collective hegemon, which would will dominate the world in perpetuity. Now, but to do this, of course, you have to create a Europe without the Russians. So expanding NATO, marginalizing Russia in Europe, it's a means to an end, and it's all very much the elites actually believe in this ideology of liberal peace. That is, as long as the West dominates, human rights, democracy will be able to be elevated, and we can transcend the great power rivalry of the past. So they do believe in this. So it becomes a promise of perpetual peace if we just commit ourselves to perpetual war first. And it's a bit foolish. But again, we also have a very heavy dose of Russophobia. I think the Russians have always been, at least for a few centuries now, been created as our mirror image. They are considered our other, the evil to our goodness, the barbarian to our civilization. This is the role that they have to play, and it's indeed Western unity depends a large extent on this hostility towards Russia, because this is what brought a lot of unity throughout the Cold War and also afterwards. And we see now that if the United States this is able to end the war in Ukraine, it's not just going to pull out of Ukraine, it wants to pull out of Europe as well, because we're moving into a multipolar order. The Americans want to focus on the Western Hemisphere, on Asia. So Europe goes from this, one of the two partners of a collective hegemony to now becoming completely irrelevant in the world. So there's a lot at stake, and continuing the war, I think, is something that keeps the Americans there and makes Europe relevant, and it has the promise of perhaps we can defeat the Russians and go back to some version of the 1990s where we were great. So it's I think it's, but some of them are just trapped in narratives. Some honestly believe now that, this was unprovoked. Putin is Hitler. They want to restore the Soviet Union, because we've been telling each other this over and over again, and we crushed all dissent. There's no acceptance for, anyone who would say anything otherwise is then immediately accused of legitimizing the invasion, taking the side of the Russians. And, so they are carrying water for Putin. This is not just academics and journalists. You see state leaders. When you have, for example, Viktor Orban of Hungary, if he says, listen, maybe diplomacy is a good thing, and he wants to talk to Zelensky and Putin, he's immediately castigated as an agent of Putin and a pro-Russian. And now we don't have to listen to him anymore because he's illegitimate. So this is the mindset. There's no dissent anymore.
Wow, that's unfortunate. Putin is going to want a neutral Ukraine, a cobbled military. I mean, minimized at most. He is going to want the regions that Russia has already taken. Those are part of the Russian Federation at this point. He's not giving those up. Denazification of Ukraine, which most likely means a change in government of Ukraine, protection for the Russian language. From his point of view, these are his asks. He's already fundamentally won the war. Ukraine cannot change the context on the ground. Will Trump give him those things in the war? Meaning, what is he going to have to give of those things, if any, to end the war? Or is Trump going to just accept it?
Well, I think Trump, as Hegseth said, they already kind of agreed to the main premise here, or the main demands, which was Hegseth said no NATO expansion. Ukraine can't accept getting its territories back, not all of them at least. And there will be no security guarantees from the United States, because that would translate into de facto NATO commitment within Ukraine, which is why the Russians invaded to begin with. So these are the main three things which it makes peace possible. Now, there's of course some room for negotiations on other issues. For example, the territories. What territories exactly? Again, Russia claims for the 4 oblasts, which is the next. However, they're not controlling all the territories in all of these 4 oblasts yet. So I'm not sure if the Americans are able to negotiate a change of administrative borders. So far, the Russians are rejecting it. But again, your beginning position is not necessarily where you have to end. They might be, they might be able to be convinced, but not on the key issues of, NATO expansion and security guarantees. But if you change the administrative border so Russia doesn't get territory it's not holding yet, perhaps something could be reached there. And also, denazification. What does this actually mean? Again, it's a bit of a vague term. If there's merely a regime change, that means Zelensky goes and you have elections, and you maybe stop renaming streets after fascists, raising monuments of Hitler collaborators. This would be if it was something like this, let's allow the Russian Orthodox Church again, give people religious freedoms, allow the political opposition to operate, allow, restore the Russian language as a secondary language. If you do something like this, it could be, it can be considered denazification. So some of these things are vague enough, which gives some scope for negotiations.
I'm curious on this idea of the security architecture of Europe. Before this started, I always say Putin was standing out like a preacher, begging people to come to Jesus. I don't know if you've ever been to a black church, but the preacher is sweating, he's holding the Bible, begging people to come up to the church. I felt that way about Putin when he was saying, look, we need to come to some kind of agreement. This situation doesn't work. You guys have blown off Minsk. I am very serious about this. And over again, he put out his own plan for a new security architecture of Europe that didn't include the expansion of NATO. Europe told him Russia doesn't get security guarantees. The US blew him off. All of Europe was like, how dare you beseech us for anything? He went in. Well, now that Russia has shown hard power and that they can change the context on the ground in a way that Europe can't do anything about, Trump seems to be willing, in whatever conversation they have, it seems that the conversation is ultimately going to be a new security architecture of Europe, that whatever they agree upon in the context of Ukraine is almost de facto going to be this kind of new norm of international relations between the US, Europe, and Russia. Is that true? Do you think that's true? And if it is true, what do you think that ultimately looks like?
Well, it's hard to say what it's going to look like, but I think this unavoidably will impact the European security architecture. And that's a good thing, because the war in Ukraine, it didn't happen in a vacuum. From my perspective, this is a symptom of a collapsing European security architecture. And as you correctly said, the Russians have for a long time wanted to have a post-Cold War settlement after the Cold War, which was mutually acceptable. Keep in mind that initially we had agreements to have an inclusive European security architecture. It was called the OSCE, but this was effectively thrown aside when we decided to instead expand NATO to create a more hegemonic Europe. But the Russians, they initially didn't give up when they realized that we're going to expand NATO instead of having the OSCE as the main institution. They even, Yeltsin and then Putin, they all suggested, they could join NATO. They was met with a cold shoulder. 2007, of course, Putin gave this speech where he warned you can't have this, unipolar or hegemonic world order. It's going to result in catastrophe. In 2008, they proposed a new pan-European security institution. 2010, they proposed a EU-Russian union. So they tried over and over again, and nothing worked. And the main reason why they saw conflict coming is because the whole premise of NATO's hegemonic peace is will be so dominant that it doesn't matter what the Russians think. We can just roll up all the way to the border, put any missiles we want there, and if the Russians complain, as we would have done, we can just say, well, Europe is NATO and you're not in NATO, so you don't have a voice here. And this is an extreme radical way of looking at security. So no matter what happens in Ukraine now, I think this system is broken, which means, well, what is the goal of NATO now? Because the main purpose was to create the military framework for a hegemonic peace in Europe, one which demanded that the largest country in Europe by population, territory, resources, and military power did not have a seat at the table. Everyone else has a seat at the table, except the largest one. I mean, it goes without saying that this is a ridiculous proposition to begin with. It would be like creating a North American military alliance and then keeping the Americans out and just surrounding them with Chinese or Russian military bases. It's absurd. This was not a good recipe for stability at all. So I think now that the Americans are recognizing, we have to walk away from this, it opens up possibility for other things. But of course, the animosity now is so great. The distrust is so great. So it's going to be very hard to do something between the Europeans and the Russians, at least. I think the Russians and Americans can, surprisingly enough, patch things up rather quickly. But the Europeans, I think it's going to be very, very hard.
Yeah, but if it's hard, I guess my thing is, what does it look like? And maybe what does it look like is kind of hard. So fair enough. But at the very least, it seems that Ukraine is going to be neutral, or at the very least, it has to be, right? I mean, I don't, and it's going to still be that intermediary between, let's say, Europe and Russia, and the way that Russia wanted that buffer zone anyway. Or am I wrong on this? I mean, that's the way I view it. I would imagine it has to be neutral. Otherwise, Russia's not going to accept it. They're just going to keep moving militarily.
No, exactly. No, so Ukraine has to be neutral. This has to be the foundation. I've been saying this for 3 years. It has to be the foundation of any peace agreement. Neutrality have to be restored, and that's the direction they're moving. But this is also why when the Europeans are suggesting, hey, we need after in a peace deal, we need to have NATO troops or European troops on the ground with, as the British say, fighter planes in the air, and all of this to make sure Russia behaves. It's absurd, because this goes against the whole principle of neutrality. Also, it ignores the fact that the losing side in a war usually doesn't get to dictate the outcome.
Exactly.
But again, I'm looking at this with optimism, because I never expected the Americans to accept these terms from the Russians. And the Russians will not accept anything else but neutrality. So I thought this would be resolved on the battlefield, because without an agreement to restore Ukraine's neutrality, what would you do if you're Russia? You wouldn't accept that Odessa, for example, in the future will become this is a historical Russian region and city, and you wouldn't accept it to become a NATO territory. So I would expect that the Russian would simply take all the historical territories of Russia, that is everything from Kharkov to Odessa, and they would wreck the rest to make sure that it can't be used as a front line against the Russians. So I predicted devastation for Ukraine and becoming a landlocked, destroyed rump state. So the fact now that the United States is willing to accept neutrality, it opens up for a much bigger space. If Ukraine is neutral, then the Russians, for example, don't have to take Odessa anymore. They don't have to wreck the rest of the country. So suddenly there's more reason for optimism. But of course, the Europeans do not see it this way. I mean, the media here is just it's gone completely off the rails. It's really absurd to read. It's a bit of a. I think hopefully future academics in the future will look into what went on here, because it is completely mad. The discourse, the rhetoric, the discussions they're having. So,
no, I agree with you. I look. I was on the radio station because on the radio station you pay attention to world news, and as you are, I was watching it and I was like, this is so different than reality. Like, reality just didn't matter. It didn't, the notion that we overthrew the government and we called it a revolution of dignity as opposed to a coup. Like, the language was so over the top, and it was over the top in a way where it was honestly easy to verify that they were lying.
But the reason why they got away with this is because we have fact checkers in the European Union, and if you call it a coup, then the fact checkers will say it wasn't a coup, it was a revolution, a democratic revolution of dignity. But this isn't fact checking, this is narrative checking. This is if facts would mean you can look, did it have support by Ukrainians? Majority? No. Did it topple a democratic elected government? Yes. Was it a violation of the constitution? Yes. I mean, this will be facts, but they don't check. They don't check facts. They check narratives. And again, anything can be. It's like saying, "No, Russia didn't invade. It had a humanitarian intervention." I mean, this is nonsense. It's just manipulation of language, and just to show how crazy things have become now in Europe. Once they had this spat in the Oval Office, the Europeans met in Paris. They were gonna come up with an alternative peace agreement. And I was very curious because the Europeans don't want peace now. They want to continue the war. So what exactly would be the alternative? And then you had Macron coming out with this proposal saying, well, let's have a partial ceasefire. That means only, stop having missiles fired from air, from sea, and destruction of energy infrastructure. The three areas where Russia completely dominates, by the way.
Right.
This should be ceasefire. You can still fight on the ground, but Russia, you shouldn't have any more air support because you dominate in this aspect. And we should do this for 1 month. And after 1 month, then we can start to discuss negotiations. So, what is the purpose? Well, it's Putin can show that he's acting in good faith. I mean, it's just madness. It doesn't make any sense at all. And no one wants to discuss what does it mean for the future of Ukraine. Will we restore neutrality? It's just everything is another Minsk agreement. Everything is just let's just send more weapons to Ukraine and prolong this. And if we do have to agree to ceasefire, we still want to have it on the table that we can reconquer the territories later. We'll have some time to rebuild our military force. We can rearm Ukraine. I mean, they openly speak about this and they call it
which
peace.
is unacceptable. Yeah. I mean, that's unacceptable. Does Europe realize how irrelevant it's become? I mean, the idea that Macron would come out and say something like that is absurd. Keir Starmer, the 20 British troops that they have in their military, the notion that they're going to send them into Ukraine is absurd. When Trump turned to Keir Starmer and says, hey, you can take the Russians, right? And everybody in the room laughed, basically using British weakness as a punchline to a joke. And, this is the British Empire. The sun never sets on the British Empire. After the Second World War or the First World War, I think Britain owned 51% of the globe. And now their military prowess is being used as a joke. I guess my thing is, but this is all of Europe. And yet they're the ones who are the most warmongers, even to the context of the US at this point. How are they this? Okay. I don't want to ask that question. I'm sorry. I'm being brutal. What is Putin thinking in this moment? I want to go back to Europe, but what is Putin thinking at this moment, do you think? I mean, how is he viewing these events in the world going forward?
No, well, I think, they have two options because the Ukrainian army is about to collapse. It is collapsing. It's weakening by the day very fast as well, and Russia's strengthening. So they know that the war has been won, irrespective of what the United States would do. But so they have two options. One, you can let the Ukraine collapse and Russia can just impose any peace it wants. It can take the territories it wants. It can put in any government it wants. But again, this will be a very messy affair. It will be, as you would say, a very ugly peace. Alternatively, they can find a peace deal, something they didn't believe was possible until now with Trump. And then, of course, they have to lower their demands and expectations. On the other hand, if you can get a political settlement, I mean, we haven't had this. After the Cold War, we never had a mutually acceptable settlement. This is why we have war today. If they can make a deal with the Americans, and ideally America can push Ukraine and the Europeans on this as well, they can actually achieve this, and there would be something at least. We can draw a line under this, like just say we were done now with this fighting over Ukraine. It will be neutral. We're going to have some security agreements. We're going to look at this European security architecture because we can't continue like this. If they can get us a deal like this, I think that I'm very convinced actually that this is what Putin would go for. But again, he's not calling me, so I don't.
Right. No, that's fair. But there's an argument to be made. I've spoken to some analysts who made the point of saying Russia doesn't want to be pushed into a peace deal, that their lot is better off by taking the areas that they want to take and then drawing the line and say, okay, we're done. Basically, we got the Donbass region. This is in our pockets. We got the Russian-speaking region. We got Odessa. Now we can call it a day. And that being pushed into an agreement before they accomplish those things is not necessarily what they want. What do you think about that argument?
Well, it depends how long this goes on. And this is kind of in Trump's argument as well. Like, we need a deal quick, otherwise there won't be a deal. Now, why is this? Because Russia is winning on the battlefield, very much so. And it's and I know that the Western media only wants to look at the shifts in territory. But the main way you would measure this would be in a war of attrition, when you look at the attrition rates. And the Ukrainians are just losing men very, very fast in huge amounts. So the ability to protect territory now weakens. And this is why also now, by the way, seeing territory shift much faster. Russia doesn't have to bomb cities to the ground to take them. Some of these towns, when I look at the photos afterwards, are they're completely intact. So so the things are falling apart faster and faster. So you need a peace now. I mean, the longer we wait, the less negotiation power there will be with the Russians. And but again, it's it really remains to be seen how this will play out. But this is what frustrates me again with the European position, because they act as if this is a principled position that, you know, either you can defeat Russia or you make a deal. This is not what's going to happen. Either you make a deal now, or Ukraine collapses and you're in an even worse deal. And I think this is what the Trump is now pushing pressure on the Europeans as well, because if the Europeans will try to sabotage the peace plan he has going forward, then I think it's just gonna said, you know what, I tried, I wanted to make peace, now it's your problem, and then just walk away from it. And as you said, with Britain and France being the main military powers, this thing would fall apart fairly quickly. And I think this is the direction we're going. And you can see the pressure already mounting on the Europeans, by the way. Vance is also mocking the Europeans now. I saw an interview with him 2 days ago saying, you know, what security guarantee do you want? Do you want us on the ground there with the minerals, or do you want, some European country with 20,000 troops who hasn't fought a war in 40 years? I mean, they're mocking the Europeans now. And this is partly because the Europeans are, when they say, oh, we can fill America's shoes, it's delusional, but it's also an indication of the intent to push against and sabotage what Trump is trying to do here.
No, I totally agree with you. I want to get your take on this. This is a lunatic, as I define her. But give me your take on the efficacy of this and whether or not this is even possible. It seems that Europe has gotten the picture that America wants to leave, that we want to call it a day. And they've apparently come to this thing of, okay, well, we need to deal with our own security. If I'm not mistaken, it wasn't Schultz. It was another gentleman who made, I think it was Tusk, who effectively made the speech of like, look, we have 500 billion people asking a country of 300 million to defend us. We have our own defensive potential. Why don't we develop it? This is Ursula von der Leyen. Listen to what she says here, and I want to get your take on it.
So if member states would increase their defense spending by 1.5% of GDP on average, this could create fiscal space of close to 650 billion euros over a period of 4 years. The second proposal will be a new instrument. It will provide 150 billion euros of loans to member states for defense investment. This is about basically spending better and spending together. And we're talking about pan-European capabilities, domains, like, for example, air and missile defense, the artillery systems, missiles and ammunition, drones and anti-drone systems, but also to address other needs from cyber to military mobility, for example. This will help member states to pool demand and to buy together. And of course, with this equipment, member states can massively step up their support to Ukraine.
This is so stupid. Like, the notion that she is saying Because the first part of it, okay, I get, right? We want to have, Europe needs to be able to defend itself. We can't entirely rely on the United States, okay? No issue. And so we're going to create a pool for $650 billion or euros, okay? And then she says, and we can use that to give it to Ukraine. For one, how fast does she think she's going to get this up and running where she's going to get 650 billion euros? And two, how long does she think this is going to go on? So she's talking about what, in 10 years to be still giving weapons to Ukraine? That's outrageous. Like, does she hear herself right now? Give me your take on this. For one, what are the chances of Europe doing this, where they're going to raise this much money? And two, how long do they expect to have this kind of obligation to Ukraine where they're still giving it weapons 10 years later? And I'm estimating 10 years because it's going to take a while for them to get this up and running. Give me your take on this.
Well, first of all, this is a reason why the Russians would like a deal if the Americans could get Europeans on this. Because if the Europeans going to continue to send weapons and missiles into Ukraine for another 10 years, it would just it would be so many problems. But well, first of all, we can start with the money. I don't think it's there because the Europeans have spent a lot of money over the past few years, especially on issues like COVID and the Green New Deal, and a lot of money and debt was taken on, which could have worked when the interest rates were low. They're not low anymore, and it's much more expensive now to manage and service this debt. Furthermore, the European economies are not just having more debt, but they're also not that productive anymore. Keep in mind that under Biden, the United States destroyed the energy infrastructure for Europe with the Nord Stream. We have had heavy deindustrialization now in Germany, which is very problematic, given that this was considered the economic engine of Europe. We see that the failing German industries have then been lured over to United States and some China with offers of subsidies if they do jump across the Atlantic. So the things are not great in Europe. So from this perspective, now jumping into it and doing this huge rearmament, hundreds of billions of euros in weapons, I don't see the money. I don't see the ability to move forward on this. It sounds like fantasy to me. And as you pointed out as well, this is going to take a long time. You need to develop the skill sets, the factories. There's a huge infrastructure that has to be put behind. This is going to take many, many years. So, and Ukraine doesn't have many years. It had a few months. Now that America's cutting the military funding, it will probably have much less. So things are not going well. So this does make sense. I can see some opportunism here, though. That is, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think, a key focus here is used to build the EU as well. That is to centralize power even more. There's much talk about war bonds and all these things. So I do. There could be some rationality behind there, but as you pointed out, what serious analyst out there believes that this is something that can have any impact on the war at all? Yep. Again, this war is going to finish. It's over. America said they will pull the plug on it, and again, I'm not sure what the Europeans wanted to achieve anyways. Let's say all of this could magically appear tomorrow. What was the plan anyways of defeating the world's largest nuclear power in a war it considers to be an existential threat? Well, what do you think Russia would do? Would they simply capitulate and go home while the Europeans begin to put their missiles on the borders of Russia? No, of course not. And no, it's but this is what happens when you don't have honest debates about why the war started to begin with.
Do they actually believe the stuff that they say? It's so outrageous. Putin is going to take over all of Europe. Really? He couldn't even, when he first went in, he only had like 150,000 troops. They weren't even enough to take over all of Ukraine. Even though they could take territory, they couldn't hold it. How the hell are they going to take over all of Europe? But they would say it, and they would say it, unashamed, no shame at all. Like, do they really believe this stuff? And how are the populations in Europe accepting this? And this could be the last question. How are the populations in Europe themselves listening to what sounds like lunatics to me. I mean, they seem delusional. That seems delusional. But she's saying it with a straight face, and she's saying it to an auditorium of people who are sitting there clapping as she says it. This is the same group that couldn't put up 2% for NATO, the same group that was asking its populations to effectively take misery for the benefit of Ukraine. What is the populations of Europe thinking at this moment about this? I mean, I was there covering the previous European parliamentary elections. They seem to disagree with these people, and yet von der Leyen is back in power. What are the European populations thinking about the things that these people are saying and the positions they're taking?
Well, it's hard to say, but first, let me just point out, the fact that the Russians moved in to conquer Ukraine. This is obviously false. As you said, the troop levels they went out in with, you couldn't conquer a huge country like Ukraine with these few troops. But it wasn't designed to do this. It was designed to force Ukraine to the negotiation table to implement the Minsk agreement, which it had failed to implement for 7 years with the help of the West to sabotage it. So I think this was very clear, and you saw this also with when the Russians invaded. They also didn't bomb that much. They avoided too much destruction because they knew that this would make it more difficult for Kiev to negotiate. Just as a comparison, on the first month of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it dropped fewer bombs than America did on Iraq on the first 24 hours. So
That's right.
So you can't really compare this. And lastly, if you go on the Ukrainian government's websites, you see that on the first day after the Russian invaded, Zelensky confirmed that, yes, the Russians contacted us. They want to discuss neutrality. We're ready to do this. So, and then on the third day after the invasion, they agreed to start negotiations based on neutrality. So all the evidence is already here. Now, what do the Europeans think? It's hard to say because none of the facts are available. They're not permitted pretty much because there's such a commitment to the narrative. If you just hint that perhaps Russia wasn't attempting to invade all of Ukraine, perhaps they were provoked, then it's immediately not treated. It's treated as an effort to legitimize it. The first thing we'll see, he's saying that Russia was right to invade, that they had the right to do so. It's like, no, I'm saying that they were provoked. And so it's impossible to get anything through. And there's a full conformity now in the media, again, among academics as well as the politicians. We have many news channels, we have debates, but all the newspapers say the same thing. And the debates are no one disagreeing against how virtuous this war is and how evil the Russians are. So it's it becomes a huge echo chamber. So it's no wonder, I think, that people have bought into this war narrative which they're being sold.
Glenn, man, I always appreciate your analysis. I always appreciate your take. Glenn Diesen, he's a Norwegian political scientist, a professor at the University of Southeastern Norway. Glenn, where can people find you, by the way?
I'm on Substack. I write a lot there, also put videos there. Otherwise, I also have my own YouTube channel where we interview different people. Only yesterday, we interviewed the former CIA director of Russia analysis on exactly how the EU got trapped in narratives. Yeah. And of course, I'm also on X. But my favorite channel would be Substack.
Wait, how did they get trapped in the narratives? Since you mentioned it, well, how did they get stuck into this echo chamber of sorts?
Well, some of these narratives, for example, the unprovoked, that everyone had to repeat this mantra for 3 years that it was unprovoked now, and that Putin is the new Hitler, all of these things. Once everyone buys into this narrative and have to repeat it, now it's very difficult. How can you possibly, how do you make peace with Hitler? You don't make peace with Hitler. You have to defeat him on the battleground. If you think about negotiating and talking with him, that's called appeasement. So this is why all the Europeans continue to keep referring to Hitler and we're in the 1930s. This is Kaja Kallas. She was also saying this only a few days ago. This is talking to the Russians. This is called appeasement. We know from history that doesn't work. Look at Hitler. I mean, everyone has to repeat this over and over again. And once you put yourself into that corner, how can you possibly move out and say, oh well, actually it wasn't Hitler after all. They just thought that a hostile military bloc on their borders were not a good idea. And suddenly we have to start explain what we've been doing for the past 3 years, because all our politicians, they boycotted diplomacy after, again, sabotaging the Istanbul peace agreement in 2022. They all put a boycott. 3 years, no diplomacy, no negotiations. Imagine the possibilities you could have, not just resolve the conflicts, but perhaps at least you could reduce some of the horror of the escalations and the military activities. Instead, they just sat on the sideline, watching hundreds of thousands of young men die on the front line, and patting each other on the shoulder how virtuous they were because they're not talking to Hitler. Once you accept that this is not Hitler anymore, everything we've done for the past 3 years has to be seen through a very different lens. And suddenly, instead of being this virtuous, good people standing up for liberal democracy and standing up for Ukraine, it appears that we sacrificed Ukrainians in a quite cynical proxy war. And again, we stripped them of all their democracy, their freedoms as well in the same process. So it's a very difficult way to move away from the little narratives we built for ourselves, to build ourselves up.
Oh, so true. And now we're trying to take 50% of the mineral wealth along with it.
I feel terrible. And I know that this is probably best security guarantees, but I don't care for it. They need these resources and the revenue themselves, because the country's been destroyed, and and they would never have accepted this unless they were in such a weak position. So
yeah,
it's they're terrible. This is what happens in proxy wars. Terrible. The Russians are taking their territory. The Americans want to take their resources, and the Europeans want to make sure that they continue fighting while there's still breathing Ukrainians left. So it's everyone wants something from them, and it's a horrible situation which they have been put in, including by Zelensky, by the way, who I do not think is this wonderful Churchill, which we're all obligated to celebrate here.
No, he's a dirtbag. My mom asked me the other day, why don't you like him? I was like, he got like 1 million people killed. Like, he had a philosophical, ethical, legal responsibility to look after his country. That is decisively not what he's doing. And when the majority of Ukrainians are saying, we want peace, and this troll is running around screaming about more war, more weapons. Oh, he is an impediment. Glenn, man, thank you for this. You have a fantastic day. Be safe.
You too there tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Glenn Diesen, that man is fantastic. And yeah, that troll, that troglodyte, that degenerate who has gotten all of those people killed and continued to do so, the majority of that country has asked to stop the war. And he is still like, more war, more war, more war. It is outrageous. It's outrageous. And I want to show one more thing. For all of those people who make this argument that, no, Russia is all about Russia, it's all about Russia. When I point out that Russia didn't expand to the border of NATO countries, it was the other way around. This is show NATO expansion over the course of, I don't know, X number of years. All of these countries, even to the point of the border of Russia. It's like, why do they think that's okay? During the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were willing to end the world in order to ensure the integrity of the United States. And yet, when the same situation flipped and it was on the Russian border, we didn't care. Unless if Russia doesn't get security guarantees, NATO is 11 light. We're just here holding flowers and lilies, and we don't understand why Russia has an issue and is freaking out over this. It's full of lies. And I'm glad Diesen pointed out how they're just out of their minds. This narrative that they've been spinning for all of these years, how do you walk that back? And in the United States case, we didn't have to walk it back. Joe Biden just got fired. In Europe's case, you have Macron, who has no political legitimacy at all, holding on to power barely, and will be replaced by Marine Le Pen in 2027. You have the Schultz government that is literally collapsed under its own weight. Annalena Baerbock is a lunatic, a beautiful lunatic, but a lunatic nonetheless. I guess I'm pointing out that the people who are the loudest have the least political legitimacy, whereas Putin is sitting with like an 80% approval rating. Donald Trump regardless of the nonsense that is coming out of Democrats and liberals in this country, he has a +2 on the issue of ending the war in Ukraine. For reference, Joe Biden had a -22 on that issue. I'm trying to point out to you that the publics want this over with. The rest of the world want this over with. The liberal idiots in Europe and in the United States, they don't. They're isolated. But that said, I see Mark has a tail that is amazing. Oh, there. It's like
Frederick von Hayek.
It's like Mark has a tail. What's going on with this? Mark,
Some people think I have one, man.
It's okay. Professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist, Schumpeterian, and recovering libertarian, Dr. Mark Frost. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay, man?
I'm doing really good. I haven't watched any of last night's State of the Union, so I'm looking forward to the clips that are going to be coming through. I've heard some things from people.
It's unremarkable, to be honest. Some of it is funny. Some of it is wild. He's effectively saying we're taking Panama Canal, and apparently he has buyers or American buyers. Yeah, in order to purchase 90% stake, the Hong Kong company is selling 90% of the stake. He said we're going to get Greenland, whether they want to or not, which was wild because he started it. Well, he started it off saying
It's
we
typical
respect
Trump.
Greenland's right to self-determination, and then he was like, however, we will get them either way, whether they want to or not. He had this statement about the war, which was hilarious, even though I know Elizabeth Warren didn't think it was funny. This is him, pointing out we have spent hundreds of billions of dollars in this war. And if it could go on for 5 more years, Democrats will want it to go on for 5 more years. Listen to this, because this was the only thing that they clapped for Donald Trump about.
With no end in sight, the United States has sent hundreds of billions of dollars to support Ukraine's defense. With no security, with no anything.
Wow.
Do you want to keep it going for another 5 years? Yeah, you would say Pocahontas says yes.
Wow.
Warren didn't find that funny. That's not the look of
Say
a
whatever
woman
you
who
want
thinks
about
that's
Trump. Say whatever you want about Trump. He's a different kind of politician. I think we can all agree on that.
Warren is
But
trying
I
to take
heard,
that in
I've had one
stride.
conversation already this morning with one of my clients in Atlanta,
Uh,
and he's all upset that they didn't. Apparently, there was a little black boy that wanted to be a cop or something, and
yeah,
they didn't clap for him. And it's a little kid, let him have his little moment,
yeah, I feel you. I hate stuff like that.
Different
To be
people.
honest.
That doesn't bother me, but that kind of stuff bothers a lot of people. They're like, "Come on, people, it's a kid,"
I got to be honest. I hate that stuff. I hate it because it has nothing to do with the speech. That's taking place.
Exactly.
It is.
It's all
purely.
It's all
here's
smoke
the-
and mirrors,
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, I don't care about this little kid. I don't care about this kid's aspirations. If he's a cop, great. If he's not, great.
Right.
You're using this purely for political,
Of course.
grandstanding. And I know
Well, it's the same way, if you put up the Gold families or something like that. I mean, it's still political maneuvering, but it's still a little kid. I mean, you can clap
You're
for a
using
little
him as a
kid.
prop.
and-
I know,
yeah,
but he's using that kid as a prop. Let's be
But-
honest.
But
Let's be
that
honest.
was my client's big outrage. He's like, these people, all
But see,
that
that's why they do it, right? Because there are people out
course.
there who are like, "Oh, that's so nice. The kid wants to be a cop," and they
Well-
ignore the fact that the kid is being used as a political prop. In which
Well,
case,
right.
they-
And now Trump and Republicans can say, we're not racist. You're the racist. You didn't clap for the little black boy,
and setting
Yeah,
MSNBC into a tizzy. MSNBC. So apparently, one of the kids that they raised had cancer, like pancreatic cancer or something like that,
Uh-huh.
and survived it. And you got MSNBC taking shots at the cancer. God, man, they're so trash. It's astonishing. Hakeem Jeffries apparently told his people to moderate themselves. in which case it pissed off Democrats. Hakeem Jeffries is trash. I am regretting my vote for Sanders on some of the stuff that he has been saying. Look,
A
just
lot of
because
Sanders folks are saying that.
it's astonishing. He has come out against ending the war, which is astonishing.
He's also in the pocket of Big Pharma.
Yeah, I mean, like it's like, dude, how are you calling yourself a lefty and saying you want the war to keep going, a war that you've lost? How are you doing that? You're talking about sending 18-year-olds into a meat grinder in a war that is already lost. And Sanders is like, I can't believe Trump is trying to end the war. It's like, okay, dude, like I have no words. Like, I don't understand how they've got themselves into such a tizzy where they don't get that all of these people dying for no reason is a bad thing. And to be honest about how it started in regards to the overthrow of the government, the blowing off of the Minsk agreements. I mean, like, this stuff are facts. And Sanders and other liberals fully blow these facts off. And again, the fact that they lost the war because it's Trump who's ending it.
And it's crazy. It's like if Trump said 2 + 2 = 4, they would hate mathematics now. You know what I mean?
Math. Yep,
It's
math.
just ridiculous. And I always thought, even with some of my differences with Sanders, I always thought he was the opposite of a warmonger. It's because in that time, remember, we kind of met up when I was supporting Tulsi. Remember that?
Right.
I was a fan. I still am. I like Tulsi. And Tulsi was a fan of Sanders. And when I was living in Dallas, Texas, before I moved here to Georgia, Trump got right at a third of the Bernie vote. So when he dropped out, his people were so angry at the Clinton machine, they just went with Trump because it's still populism. It made a different flavor of populism, but it's still populism.
Mhm.
And I remember we were texting right when this thing started. I think it was before the invasion. I forgot the name of that show on Fault Lines. It was in the afternoon, evening. Was it The Final Countdown?
There's a Final Countdown. There was one is Political Misfits. There was another one.
I think it was called The Final Countdown or something like that.
That was Critical Hour.
It was one of the shows, and it was Scott Ritter and I that were on there. And he has a perspective. I have an economic game theory perspective, but I'm also a World War II enthusiast. I played war games and scenarios and what ifs. And, it's just a hobby that I've, since I was a kid, that I've always enjoyed reading. I have books called Statistical Abstract of World War II, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we both said exactly the same thing. This thing is over. And I said, it's going to start bad. Russia never does well at first. They're going to bleed this country dry. They need to come to a matter of fact, it was before it started. And I'm like, they need to come to an agreement. And I didn't even think the invasion was going to happen because I thought somebody would broker some kind of an agreement. There would be an understanding.
Mark, I would tell you, no American
Biden intervened.
No American did. Nobody at the station thought that they were going to intervene. And I realized, I had to think about that. Like, why? Like, that's weird. How is it that all of these Americans had a very similar point of view and got it wrong? And I think,
I know why. I know why. I have a great example. Let's just choose the great boogeyman today, China.
See, I have a Deep Space Nine reference, but give me your reference.
Okay. I'm a Babylon 5 guy, man.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Okay, yeah. Let's say that China takes over Argentina, and then they take over Brazil, and then they take over El Salvador, and then Colombia.
Yeah.
And then they make it to Mexico. And every one of these steps, China would say, okay, we won't do this again. We're not going to expand northward ever again. We promise. And then they do it again. And that's exactly what happened in NATO. And I think I like the map that you showed earlier, which had the little animation in it that showed, when the wall came down and the Soviet Union ended, everybody was happy. There was this peace dividend that was going to happen. We were going to be able to get rid of NATO. We were going to be able to slash defense spending. And my naive self back then thought everybody wanted that. You know, I didn't think back then in terms of rent seeking and those sorts of things, where there's people of the establishment that have a lot to lose if there's not endless war.
Yeah.
Because Russia, if you look at its history, has not been a expansionist power. They really haven't, but they have been a power that's exceptionally paranoid because they get invaded a lot.
Right.
And I think Americans, or most Americans, just have no idea of the general memory that Russians have, even young Russians. It's beat into them. You know, we have to watch ourselves from the West and the East and the South. They've been a highly invaded country. Unlike the United States, we have no memory of
Right
these
there.
sorts of things.
It's that. I 1000% agree with you. And that's basically my Deep Space Nine reference. Where
And then,
Cisco,
you know, everybody has their hill that they're going to die on. And okay, you can have Poland. Okay, you can have the Baltics. In the
Ukraine is the red line.
interest of concessions, of compromise, you can have that. But Ukraine will not join NATO.
Red
I mean,
line.
assurances were made of that. I don't care what Jim Baker says. There's too many other witnesses that says that it is true.
Yeah.
And then everybody has their limit, you know, to where you have to act. And that was Ukraine. And it's never, and then I hear people talking about, well, they're attacking a sovereign. Ukraine's never been sovereign.
It wasn't sovereign. I mean,
It's
the
never
country
been
was
sovereign, ever.
overthrown.
In its entire existence, it's never been sovereign.
It was officially overthrown in 2014, which means
Yes.
this notion of sovereignty is out the window.
Right.
The Deep Space Nine reference is effectively Cisco gets chewed out by Starfleet, effectively saying, dude, chill out. What's your issue? Why are you agitating like this? Why are you so freaking out? And when he leaves the meeting, he goes and he flips out at Commander Kira, and he's like, they don't understand. Earth is a paradise. You know, Earth, they don't have wars. There's no violence. There's no crime. And so from their point of view, they don't understand how people are when those things are present. Like, you know, people on the outskirts are still fighting. They haven't solved their issues. And Earth doesn't get it. And I felt that way. Like you said, there's nobody at our gates. There's no enemy at our gates. There's nobody invading America in this way. And so all of us Americans are like, nah, they're not going to go in. Completely, fundamentally misunderstanding the way that Russians are perceiving these events and perceiving them correctly, by the way. Because as you pointed out, they kept expanding. And you get to a point where you have to act before you get to a point where you cannot act. Meaning, I have to take action now, because if I don't, later on, it's too late. I can't make a difference in regards, or things are that much worse.
And then Zelensky animates everything you just said in that ridiculous Oval Office escapade.
Yes.
At first, I thought that was a bait. Maybe he got baited, and then I bet I watched it 5 times because I wanted to make sure I grasped it, because I never seen anything like that.
That goofball wasn't baited.
He's an
He's
idiot.
a goofball. Yeah. He's supposed to smile.
Think
and sign
about
the
it.
contract.
Whether you like the fact that you know, Trump's a businessman, he doesn't want to do anything for free.
Right.
You know, he wants
Right. Well, there's that.
he
Right.
wants his commission no matter what it is. So whether you like the mineral agreement or not, that gave them what they wanted. It gave them the assurances. If we put U.S. businesses in there, U.S. You know, Halliburton goes in there and they start mining and drilling and doing all this kind of stuff, that is the insurance. That is the assurance that he was looking for. And it's one of the major inflection points of history that a leader can do. I mean, this is going to be in the books 500 years from now. It's probably going to, somebody's going to come up with a name for it, kind of like you did don't do a Zelensky. You know what I mean? Because he literally bit the hand that fed him. And I think it put such a distaste in Trump's mouth. I think Trump is not at all. I think Trump might take us out of NATO. I really do. I would support that, because I think it's an anachronism. Why do we need NATO after the after
Warsaw
the
Pact
Soviet Union fell.
fell.
The
Yeah,
whole purpose
Warsaw
of
Pact
it, the
was gone.
whole purpose of it was to stop the bear, to stop
Yep.
the bear, because we knew that the Europeans could not stop a full-blown Soviet invasion, especially when they were still in war mode in 1946.
That's right.
And so the entire American doctrine was the Soviets said, we will be the last to use nuclear weapons. And the United States said, thank you very much. We're going to be the first.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way we can stop you. We know that. And that's been the justification for NATO. And I don't know why after 1990, they should have just got rid of it. Russia might have turned out very different had they not had to continue this nonsense of Cold War. And I've always said, just look at a globe. I mean, just get an actual globe, not a map, a globe. And look at the United States and look at Russia and ask yourself, why should these two countries be enemies? There's, there are natural enemies, in political economy, just because of geography. There's natural enemies. Israel, Egypt, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Turkey and, Syria, those sorts of things. Geography can make enemies, but there's no reason for our civilizations to be at odds with each other. And we actually have a lot we could achieve if we were partners, but that requires that each partner, to have a partnership, you have to respect each other.
Yes.
And do I like everything that Russia does? No, but I don't like everything America does either.
Right. That's not the standard.
But I don't think it's an evil society. I don't.
No.
I think it's a very difficult society to govern. What a lot of people don't realize is how diverse ethnically Russia is. It's I mean, you can.
It's a massive landmass. I mean, it's over multiple time zones. I think 17 time zones or something? Some insane number?
I think it's 12, something like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
12. Thank you. I'm giving you too much credit.
Yeah, but still huge. I mean, ours is 4, right? Or 5, yeah.
Look, as far as I can figure it, we just wanted. It is hard to get rid of a device once you create it. And I guess from the take of the US and Europe, this is a power projection device in Europe that the US can effectively use. And if you are, let's say, a George Bush, a Bill Clinton, a Barack Obama, a Joe Biden, you like that device. That device allows you to control Europe in some way in regards to the foreign policy. And you still have this Napoleonic version of the world, of the globe as a chessboard. Trump comes in and it's like, okay, you guys are living in a fantasy land. You lost. That has been broken.
Right.
And that needs to be acknowledged that it's been broken and we need to do something else. I appreciate that. I do. I appreciate that. Now, one of the oddities, however, of Trump's foreign policy are tariffs. And that's why I brought you on. You like that segue, right? That's a professional segue.
Yes.
Donald Trump has implemented 25% tariffs on Mexico, Canada, 20% tariffs on China. He increased it by 10% to 20%. And more interesting is aiming it at Europe also. If you remember when Starmer was here, the damp rag that he is, they asked Starmer, were you able to convince the president to not, or was Starmer able to convince you to not do tariffs? He was like, I don't know what you're paying the guy, but he worked hard for that money, but no. The tariffs are still coming. I'm still hitting you with tariffs. What's the plan here? And is this plan going to be successful?
It's a complicated subject, but let's just start off with the classical economic view of tariffs. The Earth is a closed system, right? Meaning that barring Starfleet, barring intergalactic trade, the Earth is a closed system. So the argument about free trade is if you have free trade, everybody benefits because it's more efficient. So rather than have Americans making TVs, and the opportunity cost is they're not making pharmaceuticals, advanced services, AI, microchips, and things like that, why not just buy TVs from some other country? And then that frees up resources for us to do the more important high-tech things that we should be doing that actually provides more profit. But in the long run, the entire all parties involved prosper. So the argument is, if you have free trade with Indonesia, Indonesia prospers, the United States prospers, the whole world prospers because it's free trade and everybody works within their own comparative advantage. And that mathematically is true given two assumptions: that the Earth is a closed system, which it is, and two, that in addition to it being a closed system, it is indeed free trade. But we've never had free trade, and it's a word that is used by usually the hegemon, because the hegemon is the 800-pound gorilla that has the core of the manufacturing. And it's always the hegemon that likes free trade. People forget that the United States funded almost its entire federal budget for its first, 120 years on tariffs.
Yep.
The United States did
Yes,
not
we
believe
did.
in free trade. Guess who did believe in free trade? It was the
Britain.
British, because they were the hegemon at that time, and they were the ones that promoted free trade. So let's get the neoclassical view of free trade. Let's throw it out the window, first of all, because it's one of those theoretically interesting gadgets that students are forced to suffer through, in class, showing how it's a, Pareto efficient free trade. And the problem is the assumptions aren't true. They're just not true. So because we've been the hegemon, the smaller players within that framework usually get a little bit of grace. They usually get to cheat a little bit. They get to put some tariffs on because they want to grow their economies. And it's called export-led growth. So let's look at two examples that I think are great examples. Japan, or let's do three in order. Japan, South Korea, and China. All three of those countries, they were not well developed at all. And they made a decision early that said, we're going to tax our citizens. We're going to sell below cost. And we're going to subsidize this as a government. And we're going to build up an industry until we can, if not become dominant, at least become an equal player. So even to this day, a Toyota in Japan is more expensive than a Toyota in the United States. A Kia in Korea is cheaper than it is in the United States. And it's the same way in China. China has pegged its currency to the United States, which has, and traditionally, their currency has been undervalued and our currency has been overvalued relative to each other. And that's the other big difference about tariffs. If you have a gold standard, free trade actually kind of makes sense because you can't print money. I mean, you can't make gold.
Right.
Right. You can go mine it, you can go try to find some more of it, but you can't just instantly create it out of thin air like you can fiat money, central banks and things like that. So what these countries did was they practiced a form of essentially economic fascism, where the government said, okay, this is what you're going to do with respect to foreign sales. This is what you're going to do with respect to profits. We're going to guarantee you domestic profits, and you're going to sell at a loss overseas, and we're going to subsidize you. And that is only possible if governments can print money. And so I think this entire tariff debate, and the mainstream media never touches this. I don't even think their people they have to have economists on there that can go talk about it. But this is the big difference. In the age of fiat money, where currencies just float and trade against each other, and governments can just print money, free trade is not Pareto efficient. It's not something that's going to bring, peace, love, and lollipops all over the world. Now, that said, is a trade war good? Generally speaking, no. But I don't think Trump wants a trade war. I think what Trump is doing is rattling a drum, rattling a saber, and saying, hello, folks, there's a new sheriff in town. If you put tariffs on us, which everybody has, because after World War II, every country had to practice export-led growth. I mean, essentially every country in the world did export-led growth after that. And export-led growth involves tariffs. It involves selling as much of selling the best you have overseas. And then after you've sold the best you have overseas, then you tax what your own people are using. And the argument is the current generation needs to sacrifice, and your children are going to have a better world. Definitely true with Japan, definitely true with Korea, definitely true with China. So that's the political economic framework of it. What Trump has said, the best that I can tell, at least what he has said in his talks and his interviews and things like that, is that it's going to be reciprocal. So in other words, what he basically said is we're going to destroy the institution of export-led growth in this world. If countries try to manipulate markets using export-led growth, we're going to do tit for tat. If you put a tariff on us of 25%, we're going to put a tariff on you of 25%. If you're Japan and you don't like imported rice, and you have protected your rice farmers very aggressively, we're going to not let you sell here. So if you prohibit imports, we're going to prohibit imports. If you tax us, we're going to tax you. And that's what I think he's doing. And it's probably for multiple reasons. First of all, it's popular just within populism, especially national populism. I think a lot of people, I know a lot of Democrats that are like, yeah, we've been subsidizing the world way too much. And Trump, you have to give him credit. He's the first politician I'm aware of that has successfully brought the inefficiencies of NATO and the danger of being in a NATO like that, that comes up. I think Trump truly and genuinely is terrified of nuclear war. I am. And some of the listeners might say, well, isn't everybody? And no. There are neocon, go into academic international strategy journals, and you'll have all kinds of game theory about how to win a nuclear war.
Yep.
And if you can completely destroy the Soviet Union and only lose 20% of your population, you win.
By the way, that was our plan. That was what they told Kennedy. Kennedy said, these people are nuts. They were like,
yes.
Yeah, we'd lose the East Coast, but we can destroy all of the Soviet Union. And Kennedy was like, these people have lost their minds.
Yes. It's psychopaths or something. I mean, why would you even want to risk that? And I think that really is genuinely on Trump's mind. Now, he's a shrewd guy. He's using this, I think, to try and position himself to get what he wants, because he does seem to have a knack in politics for keeping the opposition on their heels. He'll say something that enrages them. They'll spend a crazy amount of time and energy arguing about it, and then getting all fired up on it. And then what he really wants done kind of just gets done in the background in the past. But the problem, so I don't think he wants a trade war. I do think he is serious about the border. I think he's serious about, fentanyl. I think he's serious about those sorts of things. I think he sees, if you're a businessman, I mean, same as me, I'm a consultant. I won't mention the name, but I have a client that I took in last week. They have 3 restaurants. Yeah. 2 of them are losing money. And they're losing a lot of money, to the point where the 2 restaurants that are losing money are subsidized by the restaurant that is making money. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, these 2 restaurants were the original restaurants their parents opened. But neighborhoods change, things change, stuff like that changes. And so they don't want to close the restaurant. And so so they're losing about they're losing about $200,000 every month. So I just did a forecast kind of analysis type thing. And I told them, okay, your burn rate, you have, given the money you have in the bank, given your capital, given your profits from the other restaurant, you have about 1 year. Now, if you just shut these restaurants down, yes, you still have to pay the lease, but you don't have labor. You don't have Social Security taxes anymore. You don't have any of that. Just shut them down. They're losers. And that's what Trump very quickly, I think, understood us. And it became even more so after that Oval Office meeting, because if I was Trump and I thought I had a solution for them to keep the territory they have, and then you get this guy goes, I still want to negotiate. I want to fight on until we get every inch back. It's just like those restaurants. Do you want to, if you keep in business with your restaurants, you're going to have a bank account of zero in 1 year. If you just dump them.
Cut bait.
Exactly. It's fixed cost. And that's what Trump sees this as fixed cost. And he's trying to talk to a child and explain to him the cold, hard realities of life. And that is, you lost, it's over. The only way to change this outcome would be if the United States entered the war actively, and then we risk World War III. And even if we win, we're going to lose half of our population. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that is what I think Trump is trying to do. And that is how his tariffs also imply here, because Europe is more worried about the tariffs than they are of Ukraine. And being a military buff, especially a history buff, Europe doesn't have anything to go fight with. I doubt the British could get 3,000 troops that are actually able to fight, prepared to fight, equipped to fight within the next 6 months.
I think Garland said they have soccer hooligans that can go.
Yes, exactly.
For the military.
And Germans, I just saw a video. Of Germans that were practicing with broomsticks. German army. It's on YouTube. They're practicing with broomsticks. Europe, because of our enablement, let's be honest, Europe isn't, the only thing they really have is a French nuclear deterrent and a British nuclear deterrent. But you still have to get the missiles there. So the French got rid of all their ICBMs. They don't have any ICBMs. I don't think the British do either. So they have submarines and they have air-launched cruise missiles. But France doesn't have a real bomber. They have an intermediate fighter bomber. Britain doesn't really have a long-range bomber either. So you're stuck with missiles. So you have to get up to the Russian border, and then you fire your missiles. But Europe would be annihilated, and Europe knows that. Without the United States, Europe is a joke with respect to fighting
military
Russia.
Power. Yeah.
Without the United States, NATO is a joke, just even on paper. It makes no sense without the United States, because without the United States, what is it doing? And I think it should go anyway. If you study history, how did World War I start? Remember that? A bunch of stupid alliances. A duke, an Austrian duke got, assassinated by a Serbian, and then all these dominoes started clicking, and all of a sudden all these alliances kicked in, and before you know it, people woke up, and there was this big, long, protracted war of attrition, and it destroyed, or better said, it bankrupted the British Empire.
Mark, what's funny? I told my ex, I was like, you idiots have started 2 world wars, and you're trying to start a third. Yeah, because it's true, right? It's like,
well, it is.
You guys have started 2 catastrophic wars, And you have the same Europeans who are out there now trying to egg the United States to start a third. And it's like, you people
Yes.
are idiots.
And Trump's like, no, yeah.
Yeah, he's like, no, he's the adult in the room in this case. So I agree with you that Europe is terrified of the tariffs. I think Bloomberg pointed out that those tariffs can kill the European economy by like 1.5%.
And even more specifically, Germany is in trouble.
Yes.
Ironically, Italy is probably the strongest European. Italy, Poland, and Hungary in terms of growth rate, stability, market strength are actually doing pretty well. But Germany is in trouble. I mean, even if none of this was going on, Germany is in serious trouble. Nord Stream. I didn't know it was that bad for Germany. I thought I figured their electric bills, and gas bills would go up 50% or something,
But what do you mean?
soared.
That's insane. Like, no,
Yeah.
nobody can.
There would be riots in the street here. If our electric bills tripled overnight, there'd be riots in the street. Nobody would take it. Yeah.
I was in Germany. I remember how cold it was because of the way they do their the heating, but it's because it's so expensive for energy.
Yeah.
And so it's like when Nord Stream blows up, I'm like, whoa. Angela Merkel fought tooth and nail for Nord Stream against all sorts of pressure coming out of the United States. Antony Blinken, if I remember correctly, wrote the book on pipelines. So the way we were looking at it was we need to break the bonds between Russia and Europe, and destroying Nord Stream does it. But that also damages European energy architecture for the foreseeable future. And this is places like Czech Republic, Germany, places that are cold, and places where energy is extremely expensive. It just got worse.
And it also puts chaos in the local politics. Like I have a lot of Brit friends, and I don't know the whole exact machinations of it, but apparently in the UK, there is some kind of energy subsidy that people either qualify for or they get. And it kicks in the winter, I think, and then because they recognize bills are higher. Well, my understanding is this subsidy was removed.
They didn't get the pension.
Send it to Ukraine.
Yeah, they didn't get the pension. In fact,
now if you got 3 kids and you're cold in your apartment, and you realize this is happening because your money was sent overseas, specifically to Ukraine, Zelensky himself says, well, yeah, I don't even know where 100 billion is going. Then there's reports, I don't know that they've been validated, but they're coming from multiple places that weapons are disappearing and ending up in other countries.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you follow Patrick Lancaster by chance?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I love him. The one that's in Ukraine.
Fascinating. I've been following it since he started broadcasting, and it's such a contrast between the propaganda we get. If you have cable TV and you turn on CNN, you think the Ukrainians are doing so well.
Yep.
And then you can look at him and you can just see clearly how they have adapted to this. They have their own little drone factory and their own little, and it's not off in Siberia. It's right up on the front lines. And I think that what I agree with Trump. I think the Biden administration is going to go down, and I don't think the history is going to be kind to Biden. Once the Trump derangement syndrome fizzles out and he's out of office and the historians start doing their thing, Biden messed everything up. I mean,
Worst president ever.
Absolutely. He's certainly in the top 3, there's no doubt about it. And the way that Ukraine was handled, both from an economic perspective and then the way our own economy was handled internally, is just a shame. And,
it is. Afghanistan, the economy, inflation, all that stuff. This idea of saying, I remember, what's her name? What is her name? Jen Psaki, where she says something like, supporting our values is not without cost. And she was saying it in the sense of, well, Americans are just going to have to pay more because of our values. And it's like, are you out of your mind? It's not our values. You're making these choices. You're making the choice for us to pay more.
And I was just going to say, and it's had the impact of creating a form of left-wing fascism. Starmer, when he was in the Oval Office, I'm sure you caught that. He actually said, "I'm proud of Britain's record on free speech."
Yep. And Vance hit him.
And they're putting people in jail and having the thought police show up to their house and all this kind of stuff.
It's like, well, what is it, in 1984, where, you know, yes is no, war is peace.
Yes.
Like, it's upside down. This is what you were referring
Freedom
to.
is slavery, you know. Yeah, exactly.
Let's see. What's wrong? Come on, play. Why don't you play? Okay. I don't know what's wrong with this video.
We've
there we go.
suddenly found all of this money to defend the eastern flank of Europe. Where was that money when the government came into power saying there's a £22 billion black hole and we need to take money away from pensioners to help fill it?
Basically, we're not going to pay the fuel subsidy. We're instead going to send this money to Ukraine. Can you imagine, like, when Annalena Baerbock come out and say, I don't care what Germans want, we're going to support Ukraine. And I keep thinking to myself, that is outrageous. Like, how do you say that openly and let it fly? But Mark, I want to, before,
sure.
I do want to get to the tariff thing, though.
Yeah.
China is not going to accept this. You're right that Europe is terrified. He can break Europe with the tariffs. Fair enough. Canada, I don't think we have, go into this for me. What's the trade balance between Canada and the United States and even Mexico? From my understanding, there are car parts that are coming from Mexico into the United States or vice versa. And that these things are all going to be disrupted. We are going to be paying more, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Tariffs are an expense. Make no mistake about it. Yes, the government creates revenue. And I think last time you had me on, I talked about the price elasticity of demand. Right. Let's say that we import something we either cannot or just simply don't have at home. Rare earth minerals sometimes, or let's just say it's a drug. Let's say it's a drug that you can only get from China. Mm-hmm. Well, any tariff, and let's say you put a 20% tariff on that, on importing drug XYZ from China. And let's say the drug is essential because if people don't take it, they die. Well, 100% of that 20% will be paid by the importing country. So it depends on the price elasticity of demand. You know, if you do it on a commodity, which has a very low, price elasticity, then the demand for it goes to zero and it goes somewhere else. That was my gripe about the oil sanctions. It didn't do anything to Russia. I said that like 3 years ago, which was essentially a tariff, right? I mean, it was 100% tariff. They're saying, okay, you can't do that. China is a different story because here's what Trump knows, and this is the truth. Germany and most of Europe is in macroeconomic trouble. Britain is near collapse, I think. Britain is massively in trouble. I mean, if you look at their increase in debt as a percentage of GDP, as a percentage of their GDP, it's actually pretty rough. China has some severe problems going on with their banking system. They have severe problems with some unemployment. They have unrest at home already.
Yeah.
Trump is banking on the fact, and this is a game of chicken. Trump is banking on the fact that they don't want these tariffs any more than we do. And I think Trump actually likes China. I think Trump looks at the world and says, why do we have to be enemies with China? Now what that means is Taiwan needs to be nervous. I don't think Trump, seriously, I think that's true. I think that.
But Taiwan was never under threat. Like, that's the part that always bugs me. It's kind of like, if you don't touch it, I don't touch it. If you touch it, I'm touching it. Yeah. It's the putting the weapons in that creates the issue. Where China is like, okay, dude, we're supposed to be one China. You acknowledge that I'm supposed to be one China. How are you putting weapons into Taiwan? Right. I'm sorry.
But part of that was always that China knew, excuse me, China always knew that if they invaded, we would defend them. And if they and the asymmetry of our nuclear stockpile compared to theirs, and even more important, the delivery mechanisms was so one-sided. China, the argument, the neocon argument is China was checked. Now, all of a sudden, we have a new sheriff in town. If he is willing to abandon NATO, he'll abandon Taiwan because it's America first. Why is it in the interest of the United States to defend an island nation that's always been part of China?
By the way, to go to nuclear war to defend it.
Right. Or is it worth it? And these, my problem with the neocons and some leftists is they're idealists. They don't live in the real world. They think that they can just legislate away, the selfishness of human nature. They think that they can just legislate and have treaties and they can create heaven on earth. And that's not true. The world is a dangerous, nasty, ugly place quite often. And you have to be a realist if you live in it. Do I like the CCP very much? No. Do I even like the Russian system of governance, given my kind of libertarian values and stuff? No. But what works for our country doesn't necessarily work for other countries.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Russians are hard to govern. They are.
Yeah.
If you don't believe me, go back to Catherine the Great. The whole history of Russia, they're hard to govern.
My take is always like, it's none of my business how they run their countries. And, I may not like Bashar al-Assad, or I may not like somebody in a particular government. Exactly. But so what? It's none of my business. Like, I don't need to go to war with the country just because I don't particularly like a leader of that country or like the system to which it operates. I'm not a fan of the way North Korea operates.
I'm not a fan of how Japan operates, but I don't want to go to war with them, and I want to trade with them.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bizarre mentality that liberals have with this stuff. But
it didn't used to be. It weird, man. It didn't used to be that way. I don't know exactly when it happened, but they got weird.
Something
maybe
changed.
It was back in when Hillary Clinton ran. I think that's about when they started getting crazy. And
maybe, yeah. I don't know when it happened, but something changed. I used to
walk lockstep with the liberal. I'm a liberal, but I'm not whatever these people are. So,
yeah, it's like I didn't leave the Democratic Party; it left me.
Yeah.
Mark, man, thank you for this. And by the way, before I let you go, how do you think the trade thing is going to turn out? I agree with you. By the way, I don't think Trump wants a trade war. I think he wants to reshape the international order. I also think that in his wildest fantasies, he can bring back American companies into the United States. What I think he misses is that also means everything becomes more expensive. Like if I have to pay this American worker $16, $17 as opposed to $3, okay, that product is no longer $5. The product is now $20. Now that may be okay if you have increased wages and you have jobs back into the country. I'm very skeptical though that he's going to be able to get those jobs back in the way that he thinks, especially after 50 years of globalism, and Trump is going to be in office for 4 years. But
I think he will. I think he will, because if you look at just the currency markets, the dollar is riding high again. That's why I was, when we were texting, I go, one of the unintended consequences of it, well, maybe it is an intended consequence of this, is I think BRICS is dead. If Trump,
we so disagree.
Well, that's okay. It's okay to disagree.
Yeah, let's spend 5 minutes. We so disagree. Go into why you think it's dead.
Sure. Because even the BRICS people, even the BRICS countries don't want the dollar to fall off the ledge, because the international chaos that will erupt from it is a zero-sum game, and everybody is going to lose on that.
Right.
The Biden administration, and that's not just them.
By the way,
Bush
I agree with that.
administration did it too. And I am, both Bush administrations are on my bottom, estimate of presidents that we've had. But a international currency standard is only as good as you're able to use it. Ironically, we're the nation that loves to talk about freedom, and yet we want to regulate the US dollar in every possible way internationally. If people can't use it, so if you go talk to the thinkers around BRICS, they're like, we don't want to do this. You're forcing us into this. Every time we do something you don't like, you want to put sanctions on us. You want to make it hard for us to engage in trade.
By the way, which is why Trump is pulling back on those sanctions on Russia.
Yes,
He
exactly.
knows, right? He's like,
And
all right,
China,
we need to
and I
slow
think
this stuff down.
yes, because Trump knows if it happened, because you've had me on this before. If BRICS ever happened, you're looking at a net drop in global GDP that would be cataclysmic. You would have it would redefine the entire global order, and China desperately wants to trade with the United States. And here's how I'm so here's why I'm so emboldened that I think Trump is mostly just positioning. His threats of tariffs on China are actually pretty modest. He's like, well, we're going to put a 25% tax on Chinese goods. China knows we're going to buy them anyway. Now, if Trump wanted to put teeth in it, he could say, we're going to put 100% tariff on anything that comes in from China. Mm-hmm. Now, that would scare them. So, because here's what it is. Let's say you have a American-made tractor. You're a farmer, and it costs $30,000 for the tractor if you buy it from an American company. Right. If you buy the tractor from a Chinese company, it's $10,000. So you put 20% tariff on it. You know what I mean?
It's still under the American tractor. Yeah.
It's still the cheaper, better choice to make. It is irrelevant. Trump knows that. Who I think he's targeting the most, I think who has Trump really angry is Europe. Europe is in Trump's sight. I think Trump actually sees China as a friend. He just can't say it right now because that will upset, just because he won and he has pretty good support right now, there's still neocons in the Republican Party. Yeah. There's still people. I was shocked when Lindsey Graham actually jumped on the bandwagon. I almost had a heart attack when I saw that clip. I'm like, what?
Zelensky,
Lindsey Graham kissed the ring too? Wow.
No, well, I agree with you, right? Like, he did say he wants to have conversations with Xi Jinping. Anytime he talks about him in these kind of glowing terms. It just seems like his thing is, I want to reshape the world order, and I need to do it in 3 to 4 years. And he's been hyperactive in doing so. It's fascinating to watch.
It is. And you have to admit, I've never seen or read about a presidency that has operated at this level of lightning speed. I mean,
short of
it's
FDR.
My job to keep up with macroeconomic changes, and it's a chore just to do it. So my prediction is, and I've been pretty good with these things, my prediction is we're not going to have a trade war. Trump is upset with Europe. That's the target. And he's really upset with Canada. But I think he's mostly positioning in Canada because we really don't have a trade deficit with Canada. We only have a trade deficit with Canada if you count natural gas and oil. Mm-hmm. He is right. We don't need their natural gas. We don't need their oil. There is so much. The United States is blessed with so much fossil fuel. It's unbelievable. There's more fossil fuel here than in Saudi Arabia. Yeah. People don't realize that. I mean, we have the largest reserves in the entire world. Canada, we can live without Canada. Canada can't live without us. Trump knows that. I think he hates Trudeau. I think he literally hates him. I think he wants to embarrass him any chance he gets.
He does.
And I think what he would like to see is him leave in disgrace. And I think that's what he's actually wanting. My prediction there is Trump will make friends with, what's his name, Pierre Poilievre?
Yeah.
That's who I think is going to be their next leader.
You might be right. Trudeau is leaving in disgrace. So you might be absolutely right.
Yeah. So I would not get so listeners, certainly American listeners, I would not get too upset over the tariffs. Even if it happens, it's going to be short term, and it's going to be who cries uncle first. Mm-hmm. And right now, in the world of nations right now, we can handle a trade war much better. We can incur the costs of a trade war more than anybody else can. And everybody else knows that. And because of that, Trump wants to leverage that. He's a deal maker. People are what they do. Trump's a deal maker. It's what he's always been. He makes deals. You know, even a lot of his products, you know, Trump vodka, he didn't make Trump vodka. He put his name on it. You know, he makes deals. And at the end of the day, Trump wants to make a deal, but you can't go in weak and make a deal. I mean, you just can't do that. Europe can't come up and say, well, if you don't protect Ukraine, we'll do it. Trump's going to laugh in their face because he has all the intelligence at his fingertips and he knows they can't. I mean, just imagine the French sending 10,000 or the British sending 10,000 troops in that trench forest attrition-based warfare, and the body bags start coming home. Public support for that war will end in instantly. 2 or 3 months. And Putin knows that. Trump knows that. And I think what Trump likes about Putin and Xi of China is, I think both of those people are very rational people. No, you may not like their values, you may not like their premises, but they're rational people. Putin is a very rational person if you study his choices and what he has done. China has acted pretty rationally with respect to their own interests. And I think Trump actually respects it when when it's China first or Russia first. I think Trump respects that. And what he hates is this weird European thing, the way the Europeans have evolved, where
liberal fantasy,
where you have unelected people wanting to go back to being warmongering. I would think Europe, of all of the places on earth, would understand the problem with being warmongers. It has not turned out well for them.
Well, like I said, they started 2 world wars, and now they're trying to start a third. And at no point does, the sideshow Bob stepping on the same rake and getting hit in the face. And then to make it even worse, they want us to do the fighting for them. It's like, it's
Absolutely. And Trump
humiliating.
said absolutely not. And now we've suspended weapons. And oh, by the way, that's actually worth 30 seconds of chat. That changes the game. People don't realize what the media has concentrated on. Oh, well, Trump's not going to help Ukraine. That's not what it's about. By him just announcing no more aid, no more weapons, no more nothing to Ukraine, that changed the game theoretic framework, if you will. Imagine you're a Ukrainian conscript. You just got out of high school. Somebody grabs you by the neck, not necessarily literally, but they throw you up on the front.
No, literally. That's what they've been doing.
Well, yeah, maybe literally even. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's what JD Vance was talking. I don't know that to be a fact. It
is a fact. I can show you video.
Okay, I don't know.
Video. Oh, Mark, those videos are horrible. You have moms who are screaming, trying to protect their kids because they're being thrown into the vans. I can show you a video where they hit a guy on a bicycle and then take him and put him in. There's another one where they grab the guy, his dog goes running. It is insane. They've been doing this stuff for months.
Well, just imagine that. You've been sent right up to the front. You don't really want to go. And you've been sent up there, and now you hear that the sugar daddy of the effort has found somebody else, and they're not going to bankroll you anymore.
Yeah.
There is a fundamental pillar in game theory in that people are rational, and the smart rats jump ship first. Only the diehard patriots are going to stay there and be butchered. So I think you're going to start seeing defections. I don't know what Putin's going to do because I haven't thought that out. Putin could launch an all-scale attack and get more territory. I think Putin's going to take what he has and call it a win. But I mean, there might be a little push here or there, but I think Trump just tweeting that or truthing that or wherever it appeared first, him releasing that information changed the entire push of the Ukraine effort because it took the wind out of their sails.
Yeah.
Because they don't have an enabler anymore. I mean, back when Biden was with them, I mean, just kind of think about it. If you have somebody financing you that says, no matter what you do, no matter what you choose, I'm going to pay for it.
Yes, blank check. It's the same thing with Germany,
You're
right?
going to go do stupid things. So
that's why they gave Germany the war guilt. They gave him a blank check.
Yes, exactly.
Mark Frost, political analyst. He is an economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, Schumpeterian, capitalist, and
And
recovering
cat lover.
libertarian, and cat lover. I thought the tail is funny. I was like, what? Mark wrote a tail. Mark, man, thank you for this. I always appreciate talking to you, man.
My pleasure, my friend.
You have a good one. Be safe, okay?
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, Mark Frost. Look, I want to thank all of you in the chat, by the way. Shout out to Federal Agent, Sophia Martinez, Brett, what was the top one? Car Care, John Butchman. Shout out to all of you. I'll go through these now, and I'll do it a little bit later in the evening. I want to go to a segment, but let's do this first. President Jafar, been missing a couple of shows recently, but for good reason. After 7 years of kidney failure, I finally had a successful kidney transplant. Your story has been an inspiration throughout my ordeal. My story? I don't have a story. I'm just living. Shout out to you, man. Congratulations. Congratulations. For people who don't know, I've had kidney failure since 17. Apparently the kidney failure went before, around the time I was 12, but it presented with significant consequences at 17. I was sitting at a chess tournament. My mom got sick of me throwing up constantly. Everywhere we went, I had a bag with me because I couldn't keep anything down. And that chess tournament, in that last game, I think I threw up like 4 or 5 times in the contest. She was like, okay, enough of this. And when she took me to the hospital, the goofball nurse and doctor tried to convince me that I was anorexic and I was doing it on purpose. I mean, just fucking idiots. By the time I got back to Richmond and he went to my doctor does blood work. He said, you look a little off. I go back to school. I get a call to go back to the nursing thing. I get a call. My doctor's on the phone. He said, come to the hospital immediately. Contacted my mom, and come to find out, my kidneys had scarred down to pretty much nothing. And therein starts the whole escapades. I've had 2 transplants. Oh God, more surgeries than I can count. 2 transplant failures, 2 transplant removals. Transplants, when they work, they're great. When they work, they're great. When they don't work, you are effectively going through the failure process all over again. Jafar, shout out to you, man. Congratulations. I'm so happy for you. And I hope it goes well. It legit does. I don't know if my story is an inspiration. I tend to drive the car heavily on the wheels. Yeah, it's a mixed bag. Like, there are consequences to driving the car on the wheels. But I live the life that I wanted to. If I die tomorrow, the world is great. Mr. Ripley, Europe has 500 million person. Russia has 120 million. If Europe wants to win, they know they need to do mass conscription or negotiate. Well, they don't have the weapons. They don't have the industry. They don't have the factories. If you remember, one of the things that came out was that it would take Europe 10 years to match the production of weapons that Russia was doing. Like, Russia was pumping out so many weapons, so many guns, missiles, bullets, et cetera, that Europe couldn't keep up. If it wasn't for the US dumping those weapons in, Europe would be bankrupt at this point. And so when Ursula von der Leyen is talking about building a weapons industry, it's not so much about the people, it's the industry. At some point, you have to train the people, but that leads to a comment that J.D. Vance made, where Britain got pissed off because J.D. Vance said it. Vance said this, where is it? Right here. Vance said this, and they didn't appreciate the fact that Vance said this, but I think it's funny as all hell, and it just so happens to be true.
What is your plan? And they would honestly tell you, well, we're just going to send them weapons for as long as we can. And here's the thing, when you would talk to the Biden administration officials in private, it's another example of a terrible situation the Biden admin left the Trump administration. When you ask them, what's the plan? Okay, we're going to spend tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in Ukraine. What is your plan? And they would honestly tell you, well, we're just going to send them weapons for as long as we can and hope eventually they can turn the tide. Hope is not a strategy. Throwing money and ammunition at a terrible conflict, that is not a strategy. The only guy in town with a strategy is the President of the United States, and everybody needs to follow his lead.
What scares me is Zelensky, when he says it's going to go on for years, how many more lives are going to be lost? He's not going to have a country to save at the end of that. The minerals deal would have provided the monies to rebuild their country and a strong U.S. presence and maybe European troops as well.
And this is an important part of it. The president knows that, look, if you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, Britain didn't appreciate that. Britain didn't appreciate that. But he's right. I don't even know if they could bring up 20,000 troops. It's like them in a rowboat is the best that Britain probably can do. And his point is, look, you guys are living in a fantasy land. This notion. By the way, this is why the German government collapsed. Apparently, they were in a meeting. Somebody asked, okay, we are already spending ungodly sums of money. What is your plan? And it's like, what do you mean? What is your plan? Like, if I'm giving you money, I'm not giving you money for no reason. I'm giving you money because there's an expectation of something. What is that expectation and how do you accomplish that objective? And they were like, well, we're just going to send money. Oh, so you don't have a plan? No, we don't. Okay, government collapses. That's Vance's point. What is the Biden administration actually trying to do? You can't change the context on the ground. If you go too far, Russia is going to escalate. And in the way that Obama pointed out during his term, Russia has escalatory dominance. So no, I'm not going to commit the United States to something where ultimately we may end up in a nuclear war because Russia always has the capability of escalating in a conventional sense, and we don't. Vance is right. He's right. He's infinitely right. How are you sending money into a conflict and you have no expectation of outcome in regards to the conflict short of hope? Hopium. This was the nonsense that the Biden administration was doing, just throwing good money after bad. Now, the other part is more grotesque. He's not wrong that if America has a vested interest, an economic interest in it, then on some level that provides an indirect security to it. Now, that doesn't mean that the United States is going to go to nuclear war to protect Ukraine, but it does mean that, for one, there's going to have to be some level of peace for them to even exploit those economic resources in the first place. And it creates incentive for everybody to chill out, especially if there are economic benefits. The problem with this is we pushed Ukraine into this war. We allowed them to blow off the Minsk agreements 1 and 2. We allowed them to blow off the Istanbul agreements. In fact, we pushed them to blow off the Istanbul agreements. And so offering NATO membership in 2008. So in doing all of this, after pushing them into, we're now like, hey, we'll protect you, but we need 50% of everything coming out of the ground. Rare earths, oil, gas, hydrocarbons, any extractable resource. If you are Zelensky, you have, I can see why you would feel some kind of way about that. You're effectively saying, I have to give you 50% of what's left of my country in order to have some level of security. Yeah, shouldn't have gotten your country to, shouldn't have allowed your country to get into this situation. I know that's brutal, but it is true. I want to go first to this. This is Joe Scarborough. Oh, wait. Before I go to that, we have one more. Right here. Alexander G. A huge part of Trump's work is moving the Overton window. Yes. Making people accept reality rather than face the media narrative. Yes. So, and there are two ways of doing that. The tax that Trump levels on the media, there's that. In addition to the tax that Trump levels on the media, changing the framing of the language. So it's not an unprovoked war of aggression. It is a provoked war of aggression. It's not Putin wants to take over all of Europe. That is no longer even said. Even this notion of a ceasefire is like, well, Russia's not going to accept a ceasefire if this starts up again. Meaning he's accepting language in a way that allows the two sides to talk, to meet, to have some basis of agreement and understanding of what reality is so you can move forward on some kind of deal moving forward. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And the last but not least, Caban. Europe is built on finance capitalism, not industrial. That's why Europe can't challenge Russia. Yes. Yes. Russia is an industrial powerhouse. They're a technical powerhouse, but they're also, as I said, industrial. Missiles, bullets, boats. It's not about your dollars. It's not about your trillions of euros. And, Europe believed that their trillions of euros would be enough to destroy the Russian economy so that the United States, they found themselves to be wrong. I can't eat dollars. I can't shoot dollars. You have to have bullets for that. You have to have a tank for that. You have to have an aircraft for that, which means you need to be able to build those things. You need oil, you need gas, you need et cetera, et cetera. Russia has all of it. So their economy at this point is what, number 5, I believe, ahead of Japan, ahead of Germany. Germany is taking a hit severely. Europe in general is taking a hit severely. So yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. Let's talk about Epstein. So the Attorney General has indicated that there are thousands of Epstein files that the FBI was hiding and would not necessarily disclose. The guy who is doing this apparently has been fired or told to resign. And on top of that, Patel has now been given those thousands of files for them to go through to ensure that no information comes out that they don't want to come out. She's saying that there are thousands of documents at this point. Now, what people want is the client list. All this other stuff is interesting. What they want is the client list. And the last time that the Epstein files were released, it did not contain the client list. In fact, it was a nothing burger. That information had already been out. And so she came out again and says, Bondi, I believe her name is, came out and says, look, there are more files. We will release those files. I am making it my mission to release those files. Then she came out, we have access to those files. We've given thousands of documents to Kash Patel. He is reviewing those documents, and we will release all of those documents. Joe Scarborough with Ken Dilanian, the guy who he's talking to is a CIA spook. He's a spook. He's a journalist, supposedly, but he was the one who got fired from the LA Times for getting his information and his stories vetted by the CIA. MSNBC hired that spook to give you some kind of context of the quality of the journalism that you're effectively getting here. Listen to this conversation with Scarborough about the Epstein list.
She said, I demand these files be put on my desk by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And that's the last we heard, or at least that's the last I heard. Have you heard anything? Did any more files appear from New York to the Attorney General's office on Friday morning at the 8 a.m. deadline?
I don't believe so. But last night she said that she discovered that the FBI in New York, or the New York, or the Southern District of New York, was holding up, was holding back, and that they had discovered hundreds of more files in their possession, and that they are turning them over now. And that may have contributed to what happened to Mr. Dennehy. But look, I don't cover this case very closely, but my colleagues in New York who do say that they don't believe, their reporting suggests there's nothing significant in any of these files. There is no Epstein client list, which is the holy grail of these right-wing influencers. So we'll have to see what's.
Okay. How can that be true? Just think about it. How can that be true? Epstein was supposed to be a prolific apex predator, a pedophile. Epstein was supposed to have had all of these people, honeypots, and had all of these people where he was videotaping sexual relations with minors in order to hold it over their heads. That's what the narrative is. Even if you don't go with the extreme narrative from the standpoint of intelligence, it was believed that Epstein had a pedophile island that he was inviting people over to hook up with kids. Alan Dershowitz is a really good example, where Alan Dershowitz was like, I never took my underwear off. I never took my underwear off. Okay, dude, that still sounds horrible. The point that I'm making here is Epstein was locked up, put in a cage. Ghislaine Maxwell, locked up, put in a cage for helping Epstein procure girls. If the feds are right, if the narrative is right, how can he not have a client list? I hope you understand my point. The entire point of Epstein getting locked up was because he was a prolific pedophile that was believed to have worked with all of these other clients that he was allowing to have sex with minors. That was the entire story. That was the entire point. That was the entire narrative associated with Epstein. In fact, part of the rationale for saying Epstein didn't kill himself was because they believed that there were so many names and so many people in the top echelon of the public in regards to wealth that they wanted him gone. If you remember, Nancy Pelosi's daughter, when Epstein got pinched, came out and put out a tweet saying something to the effect of, you may be seeing names, but if these people are indeed guilty, do not defend them. It was something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. Because even she believed that there was a list of people that Epstein was working with in order to have sex with kids. How on earth could what the CIA spook be saying be true if indeed Epstein is what they say he is? Now, I have been one of those people very early on, years ago, when Epstein first got pinched, saying, where are the Johns? Where are the Johns? If indeed Epstein is this apex predator, if indeed he has a pedophile island, if indeed he's been inviting people over to that pedophile island, if indeed he has video cameras in order to take the people who are having sex with these minors to use it over their heads, if indeed he is all the things that the feds say he is, how could there not be a list? I hope you get my point. I have no idea what Ken Delanian is talking about. Either Epstein is the apex predator that they say he is, or he's not. But the fact that you put the guy in a cage and was going to prosecute him for all of these, let's say, willful breaking of natural order, meaning having sex with children, then there has to be a list. It has to be. Now, whether you disclose that list is secondary to the point of whether or not that list exists. Bondi pointed out that there were 213 victims that they had at their disposal, meaning that they knew of that were victims, that they believed were victims. Did Epstein violate all 213? Was he the only guy violating these people? And if he wasn't the only person violating these people, then who was? I don't understand this argument that there's no list. Now, whether you expose that list, whether you have a list of names, I don't think people are thinking that Epstein had a list of names somewhere. I think what they're thinking is that within the context of the files and the paperwork, that names come out that was associated with Epstein in a more lewd and lascivious way. For Delanian to make this argument, it's very weird to me. Now, again, Ken Delanian, and it may not necessarily be unrelated, or it may not be a coincidence, that this is the same guy that was getting his stories vetted by the CIA. And it is widely believed that that what's his name was working with Mossad, Epstein, Mossad, and the CIA. Are these things related to one another? It doesn't make sense. His story doesn't make sense. There has to be a list. Either Epstein is not who they say he is, or he is. And there are Johns somewhere that are either being protected or just are not being disclosed. I don't know which one it is. Garland made the point of saying this is never going to be a situation where this list gets exposed because of the people who are on the list. Garland may be entirely correct. I don't know. I don't trust the spook, though, to tell me that there's no list. Either there is or there's not. Now, Bondi has already put herself in a corner saying that they have a list of files and documents and that these things are going to be disclosed and revealed. Now, that's either yes or no. If she's saying she has it, it would be weird for her not to have it, to go on public and say that she has it. She has not said that she has a list of Johns, which is what people actually want. It's very possible that she releases this and it's another nothing burger. That may be true. I would say, though, that I don't know if people are expecting the Johns. MAGA, maybe. I don't know if I am. I think Garland might be right. I want to move to another story real quick. Yeah, we have a few minutes. This apparently occurred live on air. Listen to what's been said here on the BBC. I'm fascinated by this. Listen to this.
Does not want to appear divided, not least in the face of Russia.
James Waterhouse there for us in Kyiv. Well, European
done?
leaders have been
Okay.
rallying behind Ukraine, expressing their full
I
backing
saw a meme saying
for
this is
Kyiv's
the second
efforts to
time
repel
ever
Russia's
that a US
invasion.
president
British
fucked
Prime
someone
Minister
in the
Keir
Oval
Starmer,
Office.
fresh off his own visit.
They didn't cut the camera off. They didn't cut the camera off. Did you hear that? So after the commentary, the guy is still talking. And for whatever reason, they didn't cut the mic. And he says, I heard that this is only the second time that a president has fucked somebody in the Oval Office. Talking about Zelensky, effectively saying Trump advanced fucked Zelensky. This is only the second time that somebody has been fucked in the Oval Office. And the BBC, the trash network that it is, apparently did not cut the man's mic off. Didn't cut it mic off. Oh, that is hilarious. That is hilarious. And last but not least, Bernie Sanders. Bernie fucking Sanders. I don't want to say I regret that vote. And maybe there are two things about it. One, Zelensky has done a U-turn. Zelensky has done a U-turn. So Zelensky, after putting out a statement, this, effectively saying, I would like to reiterate Ukraine's commitment to peace. Okay, that's nonsense. Obviously, you were at the White House. You obviously don't have a commitment to peace. None of us wants an endless war. Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. Nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians. My team and I stand ready to work under President Donald Trump's strong leadership to get a peace that lasts. We are ready to work fast to end the war, and the first stages could be the release of prisoners and troops in the city, ban on missiles, long-range drones, bombs on energy and other civilian infrastructure, and a move fast through all levels and work with the U.S. to agree to a strong final deal. Now, I will tell you, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. You're losing the war. And because you're losing the war, Russia is gaining more and more territory. Russia is destroying the Ukrainian military, which was one of the primary objectives. You have no capacity to do anything about it, nor can you hold them off. So why would they come to a ceasefire with you before actually reaching a deal? There's no point. You're losing. They know you're losing. All of these plans only benefit you because you're the one that is losing. So Russia is probably most likely will keep the pressure on militarily as they may work with Trump for a deal. But you must understand there may be territory that Russia wants to conquer before making any kind of deal, in which case they will probably drag out the peace negotiations as they get the territory that they're looking to get up until the point where they say, all right, we're good. We don't need to go further. Let's talk. Let's have a deal. My point is, you're not going to get a ceasefire until they get to the point where they are ready to deal and negotiate. This notion that Zelensky is ready for peace is nonsense. But shortly after doing that, he comes back and puts out another video. What Trump wants from him is A, an apology, and B, to be willing to effectively end the war. Trump also knows that the longer this goes on, the weaker Ukraine gets. And at a certain point, there will be no bargaining chips for Ukraine at all. Trump, at the very least, wants the military to still be on the battlefield when he is making his negotiation. Those negotiations will go beyond Ukraine, because if the negotiations are limited to Ukraine, well, there's nothing to negotiate in that context. There's nothing you can extract from Putin, specifically if the issue is Ukraine. Now, if you expand it to let's talk about Iran, let's talk about energy, let's talk about sanction relief. Okay, well, now you've expanded the conversation beyond Ukraine into areas that the U.S. has more influence and more control, in which case you may actually get something out of that. That is what Trump was trying to explain to Zelensky that dunce didn't quite get. In regards to the mineral deal, Zelensky has effectively come out and said, I'm willing to sign. He does a U-turn. So he says this in this video right here. Now, this is not in English, but the English is at the bottom. He says one last thing, that the Russians have not changed their positions or demands regarding Ukraine. Well, no, because you've lost the war. That's what happens when you lose a war. They insist on reducing our army. Again, they are reducing your army by shooting each member in the face. They are reducing your military by killing them. That was Trump's point also. It says renunciation of our territories as well as a significant political deformation of Ukraine with the weakening. Dude, you have no capacity to take back your territory. You've lost a war. There are consequences of losing a war. Let me go to my guests because I'm gonna get deeply annoyed by this. And after a while, I'm gonna start screaming. I want to bring in my guests. I'm joined with the one and only KJ No. KJ No is a political journalist. Is a journalist, political analyst, writer, teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region. How you doing, KJ? You doing okay today?
I'm doing well. Good to be with you.
It is good to have you, my man. Sanctions. Trump has leveled 20% sanctions on China. Now, China has come out very strong and said, we are ready for any war, economic, militarily, or otherwise. Effectively, don't F with us. Now, Mark Ross, he's an economist. He was here a little bit earlier. He made a really good point. If Trump really wanted to have a sanctions war with China, those sanctions would have been 100%. 20%. It's not overtly significant. Or is it? Give me your take on this. What's going on?
Well, I think, it's like any situation where there's contestation. You don't want to put everything out on the board at once. You want to slowly raise the heat in this specific situation. So I don't think that Trump wants an overt sanctions war with China because, as I've said before, Trump will lose that sanctions war. But he is strongly influenced by a neo-mercantile policy. And that neo-mercantilism, involves working for a trade surplus or at least a balance of trade. There's strong protectionist elements of his policy. There's also all about, export controls, etc. And so he really has this strong economic nationalist approach to China. And as I said before, it's not going to work. The current trade surplus with China is a few $100 million, about $500 billion. That is the GDP of one of China's major cities. It's not that important for China. China can go to the mat on this. And so this is why they said, and this is extraordinary language from the Chinese administration. They said, intimidation does not scare us. Bullying does not work on us. Pressuring, coercion, or threats are not the right way of dealing with China. And then they said, if you want a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end. We urge the US to stop being domineering and return to the right track of dialogue and cooperation at an early date. It doesn't get any clearer than that. And certainly the Chinese government is not prone to making these kinds of statements. It's very, very strong. And I think they're making it very clear that we will not be pushed around. And that's probably the right approach for the Chinese government as far as their interests are concerned.
There we are. Yeah, they're being very strong on this. They don't seem to be willing to take a lesson from Trump this time around. And I would imagine this is the second time Trump has done this. And I was looking at some of the reports. Farmers have been taking a massive hit in the United States. And obviously, they're taking this massive hit because of the policies that Donald Trump is pushing through. And Trump is acting like, yeah, there may be a little bit of chaos, but it's not going to be that bad. Okay, well, that's not really the case. Right. I was looking for the article. I can't find the article, but right here. Yeah, right here. This is what we are effectively dealing with Donald Trump's policies. U.S. farm bankruptcy surged 24% on strain from Trump's trade war. Farmers increasingly dependent on federal aid, crop insurances. Bankruptcies rise to the highest since 2011, the farm group says. Okay, so if he doesn't want a trade war, what does he actually want?
He wants China to back down. He wants China to be pliable. He wants China to support, his national rejuvenation based on, his policies. Now, once again, it's not going to happen. China has its own interests. They are offering and tendering the hand to U.S. in win-win cooperation. They're saying, both of us can win. And as far as the U.S. is concerned, the current global system works for it as far as it's concerned, because it can get stuff from China for free. The only thing that it has to give back to China, what China has built with tremendous, hard work and, industry, the US can simply reimburse China with paper. They just print this paper. It costs them nothing, or they, electronically create it. That's all they have to do. And so this is actually an advantageous deal for the United States. But because Trump has some very neo-mercantilist thinking in his own administration and probably in himself, he doesn't want that current state of affairs. Now, there's one piece in which he's not wrong, and that is that he is seeing that the current system is not sustainable. It's not sustainable for the United States. Certainly, it's not sustainable for the world. And I think both China and the Trump administration have realized this. Let me give you an analogy. In 1991 or starting 1989 and then, really kind of hitting its pace in 1991, the United States started crowing that it had defeated the Soviet Union. That
end of history.
It was the end of history, right? Capitalism, liberal, capitalism had defeated those evil communists. Now, let me give you an analogy. In 1982, there was a Korean boxer. His name was Bae Ki-sung, and he fought a Japanese fighter called Kenji Yonekura, and he dominated the fight. He thrashed him over 10 rounds. He completely dominated him. And then at the end of 10 rounds, he won unanimously. So, went back home, celebrated. And then he collapsed. And then 3 days later, he was dead from, subdural hematoma, brain damage.
Yeah.
And in a certain sense, we can think about, the USSR contestation to be a bit like this. There was this crowing that the US had defeated communism and the USSR. But actually, both had been defeated. And the US, and in particular US capitalism, was on a downward spiral. It really kind of ran out of gas in the 1970s and was being propped up through a series of, extraordinary measures. And by the time we hit the 90s, it was essentially a done deal. And in 2008, the French president came out, Sarkozy, and said, laissez-faire, c'est fini. Capitalism is finished, right? He said, it's all over. We're dead. And he was an, extreme conservative, but he was making the right observation. The system is not working. If you have any doubt about this, just step outside, look around, look at all the immiseration, ask yourself if this is a system that is working. Nothing works anymore. None of the corporations work anymore. They just gouge and cheat. That's what's happening.
Yeah. But KJ, you made the point, you said pieces of paper for products, and you said the current state of affairs is good, but it's not. I mean, like, that's one of the arguments that people make about NAFTA. It's like we gutted our own work base in order to send products to the Philippines, to Mexico, to China. And then it's like, okay, so the guy in China who makes $5 an hour, well, in the US, he was making 15. And so, yeah, we get a cheap product, but we also now have somebody who's without a job and is working in a service job. It's a negative for us in the way that we're looking at it. Donald Trump, look, I'm a lefty, right? It's the way I look at the world. From our point of view, or from my point of view, this arrangement of globalism has not been to our benefit. And I know why the US did it. After the Second World War, we were the only game in town. And so from our point of view, yeah, we want our products all over the globe. We love globalism. It's great because this is a game that we can win. And then when China comes in and all of a sudden it's like, it's better at it. Well, at that point now we have issues, right? But at this point, it's been going on for like 50 years. And you have all these people who are now working service jobs, making pittance of a wage that they were making at a factory at one point. And they feel some kind of way. And you can make a case that Donald Trump is the avatar of those people. Now, whether or not he could be successful in pulling the jobs back, I'm skeptical. But that is his point of view. Give me your take on that. I mean, do you think that's true or false? I mean, like, I can tell you this, a factory worker who's making $20 an hour and who loses this job because that factory is sent to China, Philippines, Mexico, Malaysia, whatever. And they paid the worker $3, $5, and they sell a product for 10. Okay, well, that guy has lost his job. Yes, the product is cheaper, so you can buy it for $4, but he is unemployed now, or he's working at 7-Eleven, or he's driving Uber. That is not a net win in the way that we look at it. But correct me if I'm wrong. Give me your take.
No, you're not wrong. And that Uber driver will very soon be out of a job too once they, automate driving. And all of this has to do with the fact that no, those jobs are not going to come back. And we're actually going to lose more jobs as, AI takes over a lot more of the repetitive, both, physical and cognitive tasks that can be done. But when you say that, it didn't work, well, actually, this neoliberal global capitalist system worked just fine for the ruling elite. I mean, they made out like, bandits, right? I mean, it's just untold wealth, untold riches, untold power. So it worked very, very well. It was a disaster for the rest of us, for the rest of humanity. But actually, that's the system itself is an ongoing disaster. It's an ongoing disaster. We look at this, huge pile of rubble, and we know that there are people who are benefiting from this. So it worked just fine, and it worked as it is supposed to work. But what we're describing here in the loss of, or the immiseration, the damage to the working class, especially the industrial working class, is, this is the functioning of monopoly capital. Capital looks for the cheapest wages. It will travel all over the world and go to wherever the wages are cheap. And it went to China. Now, the thing to understand about China is from 1980 until about the current moment, yes, China obtained a lot of industrial jobs because the industries were offshored to China. But at the same time, Chinese industrial wages went up 150-fold. I'm not talking 150%. They went up 150-fold. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's the largest transfer of wealth, if you will, to the working classes in the world, which is why China has ended poverty. And on the other hand, the US was also making out like bandits on this. But in the US side, it was the largest transfer of wealth to the ruling elite. And that's
Yeah.
why China is doing well. And that's why the United States is circling the drain. Now, as I said, this is the logic of monopoly capital, is that it takes over everything. Once it is a monopoly, it is so big and powerful, it can buy and sell politicians, get the legislation that it wants. But more than that, it does not have to do anything to make money. Because on the one hand, it's so impoverished the working class that the working class no longer has the capacity to buy anything that it's making. And on the other hand, because of its monopoly power, it can simply gouge those who are still left standing. And having had these huge monopoly profits, what it does is it simply financializes itself. It puts its money into financial products, financial techniques that simply gouge rent from anybody else who is left standing, or anybody else that it can drive into the dirt with its, extraordinary power. And so that's why it's not going to work. That's why it's not going to bring back jobs. And that's why, if you look at the long arc of history, if you look at the big picture, that notion that capitalism beat communism in the form of the USSR was a misnomer, it was misguided, because actually they defeated each other. And as I said, capitalism has been on its last legs since the 70s, certainly since the 1990s. And in 2008, the death certificate was pronounced. But now it is simply going on in this zombie phase. And it thinks that by, pushing China around, by forcing, opening new markets, that it can somehow keep itself staggering along until, the next major crisis, which is simply an ongoing one.
Yeah. KJ, why does China keep pumping fentanyl into America? That's what my president says, that China
Yeah.
keeps flooding us with fentanyl, which is the reason why he's putting on the tariffs on China.
Yeah, I think we have to make this very, very clear. China is not exporting any fentanyl to the United States. It has put bans on 46 precursor chemicals to fentanyl, because before the allegation was, well, you're not sending fentanyl to the US, but you're selling, these generic pharmaceutical chemicals that can be used to make fentanyl. Well, they're used across the board for a whole bunch of things in general. But China, put restrictions on all 46 of them. So it is trying its absolute best. But the US has a drug problem because, as I said, we're looking at massive immiseration. People are self-medicating simply so they can get to the next day, just to survive. And on the other hand, we have the US pharmaceutical companies that made out like bandits by addicting people to fentanyl. And if the US was serious about fentanyl, it would remove fentanyl from Schedule 2 and put it onto Schedule 1 and simply ban it. They could do that, but they're not doing that. And so they just want a convenient scapegoat. China is responsible for everything that's wrong with the United States. There's never any level of self, awareness, self scrutiny, self, criticism. And so it's just a cheap target that they're going to use as a pretext to blame China for domestic woes that are created by the contradictions of the US system and continue to escalate. Just one more parenthetical remark, Jamal.
Please.
The country that had the world's worst drug problem on the planet was China. In 1949,
Opium.
when the People's Republic was started, they started off not simply with massive poverty and massive, destruction after, a century of colonization or partial colonization, but they had the world's largest opium addiction problem. That 90 million people, about a fifth of the population of China, was addicted to opium. It was completely destroyed. Why did that happen? Because the Western powers sold opium against China's massive resistance.
Right.
They had 2 opium wars. They forced the Chinese to accept the trade of opium. And Hong Kong was the staging ground. It was the port from where all this opium was trafficked. It was essentially a trafficking platform. And the great US East Coast fortunes became rich from this opium trafficking. The Ivy League schools, they all made their money from opium endowments. We're talking about, Princeton, Columbia, Harvard. All of these schools became these, world-class institutions because they had money pouring through them through the destruction of China through opium. After the People's Republic of China was started, they got rid of their opium problem in 4 years. By 1953, they got rid of the problem of opium addiction.
Now, how did China do it?
That's the question. And the thing is, if China can do it, the US can do it too.
Different systems. I mean, like it's. I get the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong. When I look at our society, I look at things like, do people have enough money to pay their bills? Are people stressed? Can they pay for their kids? Can they pay for their car? Basically, can they afford to pay for a life? And if the answer is no, then those people typically get in survival mode, and it creates all sorts of difficulties, not just economic, but also internal. Like this notion of, like you said, miseration. When you put people in difficult situations, those people respond. I always say, like, difficult situations don't necessarily make beautiful people. Those people struggle. Drugs is a gateway, right? It's the out. It's a momentary release from your daily struggle and strife. And it's one thing if the U.S. says, okay, we're going to make sure people have education, we're going to make sure people have healthcare, we're going to make sure that the basic necessities of life are at the very least inexpensive and they can have access to them. Basically, we're going to create a haven for beautiful people, for people who are self-actualized. That is not what we do. I mean, when you're looking at somebody driving an Uber and working another job and having a kid, okay, well, what is the person's life like? What is the conditions that the person is functioning under? And yeah, they may not be horrible, but I would imagine that they are not necessarily in the best, let's say, state of things. And you multiply that by 320 million people, where you get the majority of people who are basically struggling to make ends meet. It is stress. I know my mom went through it. Like, you're trying to raise a kid by yourself. You're working a job that is not paying exactly what you needed to pay. So you're borrowing from one to the other. You go through issues of depression, issues of worth. Like all of that stuff comes into play just being a person in a society that doesn't necessarily seem to care all that much about the person. And so if China decided, okay, well, we're going to do something different. I guess my point is these are different systems. China's systems seem to be more biased towards person. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, though. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm talking out my ass.
No. I think you're absolutely right. China's system is based on people. It's focused on people. It's a people-centered governance system, whereas the U.S. is a profit-centered governance system. So people matter in China. And so when the PRC, decided that it was going to tackle this issue of 90 million people addicted to opium who were not functional in their society, what did they do? The first thing they said is, this is not an individual problem.
Yes.
Like here, it's always, it's blamed back on the individual, right? There's some kind of individual failing. There's something wrong with you. That's why you are on drugs. In China, they saw it as a national failing. And therefore, it required a national response, a whole of society response. So what did they do? The first thing they did was they gave everybody land. Land reform was the basis for the transformation of society and certainly the transformation of their drug problem. Can you imagine if you gave everybody who was homeless in the United States and possibly, using drugs, if you gave everybody a home, do you think they would be using drugs? Certainly a lot less, right? It depends, but certainly a lot less. I mean, I had a colleague who was a social worker, she was going to Johns Hopkins, and as part of her training, they sent her out for 1 week to live with the homeless as, part of her training as a social worker.
Yeah.
That was several decades ago. She is still traumatized to this day. And this was a person, who had all the resources, who was simply play acting at homelessness for a week, and she's still traumatized. Can you imagine what it is like for somebody, who's, a regular person finds themselves on the streets?
I can't.
In very short order, you are going to end up with mental illness. You are going to have to self-medicate. And so think of the converse, where you are taken out of that situation. The government decides that it is going to have a whole of society approach to solving your problems, where the entire country comes together. You give everybody land, you give everybody food, you give everybody shelter and clothing, and you give them education, and you give them society, you give them a community, and you give them meaning. If you do that, you can get rid of drug problems, in 3 years, in 4 years, like the Chinese did. If you don't do that, and you just continue to individualize and blame the victims of the system, you're not going to get anywhere. Instead, you're going to have the simple, kind of churn of the nonprofit industry, enriching itself while not making any difference, while the rest of the society continues to, fall apart. And so I think, the issue really is, where do you put your focus? Who do you blame? What do you see as the root? And how do you change it? If you have the right lens, if you have the right understanding, you can change that. And the US could do that too. It could deal with the conditions that create addiction, but it won't. And instead, it chooses to blame the individuals domestically, and then it wants to scapegoat other countries because it sees that its strategy is to blame others. It's never my fault. Blame others, create, a scapegoat, a false target, and at the same time escalate against that target in the hopes that this escalation will also have beneficial effects.
Yeah, we don't get into why the person is on drugs. Like that, to me, that would be the most operative thing in the world, right? Okay, why is this person using? Is there something in this person's material conditions that is incentivizing this person to do this? There was a guy who's doing experimentation on people who are drug addicts. And what he pointed out was, oftentimes, it's the living conditions that the people are in that drives the behavior. Meaning, it's not like this person is just addicted to drugs and they can't get off of it. It's more so they're living in a situation, and once they get out of prison, going back to the exact situation that they were living in before, what do you expect the outcome to be? No, I agree with you. Give people a house, give people, something to do with their time, give them a life, allow them to, like you said, give them community. You have a far better chance of pulling that person away from whatever the material conditions were that got them into those drugs, as opposed to just letting them go back or putting them in a cage. That's the other thing, right? It's your fault. We're going to put you in a cage, et cetera, et cetera. No, I agree with you, KJ.
And stop palming over these drugs. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies made out like bandits by overprescribing, by prescribing at a drop of a hat, simply to palliate the system and just get them out, of their offices, while the doctors wanted them out of their offices, while the pharmaceutical industry was making out like bandits.
I have mixed feelings on this, because as somebody who, I'll disclose for transparency. When I was 17, kidney failure. By the time I was 19, I was so off the reservation in regards to just blowing off issues of health and constraints that I ended up with neuropathy at around 19. Lost the ability to walk, I had to relearn to walk. The nerves in my legs, feet had disintegrated. And it took like 10 years for that to normalize, where I could walk normally, all that good stuff. The sensory nerves never came back. And because the sensory nerves never came back, I interpreted it as pain. And so gabapentin, tramadol, and I ended up effectively taking tramadol because tramadol is the only thing that effectively works for it. When the federal government decided, oh, we need to crack down on this, at that point, doctors started to get very dodgy about prescribing pain meds, even to people who needed it. And so, despite the fact that I had been on it since I was 19, meaning there's a proven track record of me using this in order to deal with neuropathic pain, my doctor was like, I'm uncomfortable prescribing it now. And even went so far as to say, hey, maybe you don't even really need it. Okay, so you've been prescribing something for the last 15 years that I don't need. Is that what you're trying to communicate to me? Like, there are times where people actually need the pain meds. And because of the way that the federal government has decided to crack down on it, people who need it are not getting it. And some of those people are committing suicide. Some of those people are using harder drugs. So they go to heroin or something like that in order to effectively deal with pain that should have been treated through a doctor, who doctors are no longer willing to do. I get it, right? Like the Sackler family, they're trying to make a buck. And drug companies were trying to make a buck. And they were giving out this stuff like candy, even in cases where it wasn't necessarily necessary. But I'm conflicted on this because I know as a flat fact, people who actually need it and can't get it. And I know that's personal, but still, I don't think the story for me is somehow unique to other people who actually require it, if that makes sense. And I don't know the middle ground for it. I really don't.
No, I don't disagree with you, Jamal. In your case, I think it was absolutely necessary. I mean, neuropathy is, a living hell, right?
Dude, when it first started, I was literally taken to the ER every night for morphine shots to just go to sleep. Yeah. And I think it was maybe 5 nights of doing that. The doctor was like, okay, this is unsustainable. You can't keep this up. You have to find a way to manage the pain in a way that basically doesn't bring you here to the ER. It was vicious. Even today, I still take tramadol and gabapentin for it. There's no way around it. It's, you're just stuck with it. But I guess my thing is, I don't want people who need meds to not get those meds because of some kind of political thing where it's like, okay, we went too far in the wrong direction, so now we're going to screw over people who need the meds.
No,
I don't agree with you.
That's not what I'm arguing, Jamal. And
no, I don't think you are.
There should be, black and white, approach to this. People need the meds that they need. But what we do know is that, the pharmaceutical companies were overprescribing, often in cases where it was not necessary because they were making windfall profits. Now, talking about chronic pain, I've had chronic pain for decades because of, post-operative conditions due to military injuries. So I know what that is all about. But at the same time, once again, it's easy to say this, but I always think we need to look at the bigger picture. Should you or should anyone have received better care? Could they have received better care that would possibly diminish the need for palliative care in terms of pain medication? Sometimes it's not possible, but in the ideal situations, we would receive, medical support and medical screening and medical testing that would ideally head off some of these extraordinary, painful conditions. And then, as necessary, people should receive the medical palliation that they need, including painkillers. I'm not opposed to any of that. But we do know that if we look at society in general and we look at the pain of society in general, what we see is a spectrum where people are simply trying to manage their pain through painkillers, pain that is really social harm and social pain. There's no use for that. And then there's also overprescription because it fits the agenda of the pharmaceutical companies, the corporations that make windfall profits off of that. And then the other piece, and I think this is where we can think of pain as a metaphor, is we live in a society where the pain of the working class, of the pain of the majority of people, is not felt by the ruling class. Like it's similar to Hansen's disease, leprosy, where damage at the extremities is no longer sensed by the brain, and therefore you just end up hurting yourself more and more. You lose fingers, you lose toes, you lose your extremities because those pain signals are no longer felt. And I think that is the thing that we need to shift, that the ruling class needs to understand that there is pain, there's unbelievable pain happening in the working class, and they need to do something about it rather than trying to block those pain signals through palliative measures and through projection and through lies and through mystification. And
that's so good, KJ. Yeah, I agree with you. What did they say? I think it was a Princeton study that only less than 1% of what the public wants is articulated through the political space, that the public just fundamentally gets ignored. And if you look at Democrats today, they're like, we're doing everything right. We just need more messaging. Like there's a disconnect between, okay, what is the working class and what does the public want versus what do they get on the other end? It's wow. It's been that way for a while, but it seems to be getting worse.
They don't need more messaging. They need to listen. They need to listen. And that's what has not been happening.
KJ No, man, I always appreciate these conversations, KJ. KJ No is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He was contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is available at iacenter.org. And KJ, where can people find you?
People can find my work on the China Report on the Breakthrough News Network. And we have just released a show about China's health insurance system, where people can go on and see what it looks like when you have a government that listens and that is responsive to the needs of its people, and what that translates into in a medical context.
That was a video you sent me. Oh, I gotta watch that. KJ, man, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. Always a pleasure.
Be safe, man. Have a good one. All right. KJ is fantastic. I always appreciate that guy. He knows his stuff. Even when I disagree with him, I love him to death. And I don't think I disagree with him on the drug thing. I think he's right. I just don't know the middle ground. I mean, keep in mind, after I had a transplant, second one, I was in a lot of pain, excessive amount of pain. And they took me off pain meds. And I was like, hey, I'm in pain. What the fuck is wrong with you? And they're like, well, the doctor doesn't want to give you pain meds. He's like, why doesn't the doctor want to give me pain meds? I'm in pain. He was like, well, we don't understand why you're in pain. And so he started doing x-rays just to cover his own ass over and over and over again. I am laying in the hospital for a week in vicious pain. And the nurse is blowing me off. The doctor is blowing me off. They're telling me I'm full of shit, that I'm making it up. Fast forward a year later, and come to find out, the reason I was in pain is because I had an abscess. And because they didn't find that abscess, because they assumed that I was lying for whatever particular reason about being in pain. You had an entire floor, an entire staff of nurses functioning under two doctors that effectively mocked, belittled, and flagrantly ignored the medical obligation in order to deal with what was going on. And because they didn't, it had been sorted out a year and a half later, where they realized, oh, so I wasn't lying, huh? My point of view of doctors, nursing, staff, all this stuff is shaped by that. I have very little patience for doctors and their point of view. And nurses are just minions from my point of view. I don't trust them. It's the exact reason why I wouldn't necessarily go for another transplant now. My point of view has become very brutal in this regard. All right. I am going to end this. I'm going to end this. Shout out to all of you. We have hit 40K. We have blown past 40K. That is only possible because of all of you. And I appreciate all of you for helping me hit that number. I wanted to get another. I don't have time. I have to be on Ted Ross show, Ted in Manila. All right. I want to hit Sanders. I'm not going to be able to hit it now. I'm not going to have time. I will come back after I do Ted Rawl and Manila's show, and I will hit the Sanders topic. Sanders, just to preface it, comes out with a response video to Trump and the State of the Union. And of course, one of the things that Sanders continually talks about is the war. And the way he talks about the war is effectively, he wants the war to keep going, which is, again, astonishing. And while he is claiming that Donald Trump is lying, Sanders is lying through his teeth. He is lying or he is willfully ignorant of the issue in regards to the war. I don't know which one it is. Sabby Sabs pointed out she regrets her vote for Sanders. If you are okay with hundreds of thousands of people losing their lives for no good reason after we provoked and pushed a country into a war, then you're a degenerate fucking human being. And, you know, there's a level of pathetic lying and propaganda that Sanders has either accepted and not just accepted, is also willfully putting out on this issue. I don't care if Donald Trump is Satan himself. If he is willing to end that war, then we should end the war. And Sanders is living in this fantasy delusion of these other liberals who are out there screaming that they want the war to continue. They want the war to continue. They got to stick it to the Russians. You're out of your mind. You've lost. You've lost. Own the loss. As opposed to continuously with this pushing. What does Sanders expect? What does he expect? That you just keep giving money to bad cause? Does Sanders realize that the Ukrainian military is going to collapse? Does he get that? Does he understand that? Even with the U.S. assistance, it will collapse. Russia will take more territory. There is nothing you can do about it. And instead of recognizing that reality in the way that Trump has recognized that reality, Sanders is in this delusion with these other liberals and these other worth nothing, substantiveless. Let's put that poorly. Degenerate sociopaths that want all of these people to keep dying because ultimately it's not them. And more to the point, it's Donald Trump that's ending their war. Sanders is losing his fucking mind. He is off the reservation. If he had whatever left of bona fides, those things are gone today. He is completely and utterly deranged. The notion that you want a war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people, and now they're coming up with schemes to bring out 18-year-olds. That is disgusting. It's disgusting. Bernie is for it. Bernie the warmonger is for it. And I suspect a lot of it has to do with because it's Trump. Deranged, disgusting, degenerate, pathetic liar, Bernie Sanders. That's where we are today. In fact, Sanders even put this clip out claiming that we're standing by Ukraine. And apparently we're standing by Ukraine by helping them lose 20% of their territory, by getting 1 million people killed, not to mention hundreds of thousands of maimed and permanently wounded. That is what Sanders means by standing by Ukraine. He is out of his mind. The only person that is trying to stand by Ukraine is Donald Trump. They may not want to hear that. They may not own that, but it's true. The majority of people in Ukraine want the war to stop. Full stop. Majority of people in America want the war to stop. Full stop. Sanders is pissing in the wind in this. And he is going against what the American public wants purely because it's Donald Trump that's doing it. The campaign speech that Donald Trump, the speech that Donald Trump made last night was apparently very well received. I didn't particularly like it. I thought it was boring. But the American public apparently enjoyed it. They agreed with him on predominantly of that speech. So you can imagine if he's getting 60 to 70% approval for State of the Union, it's, I guess it's not a State of the Union, but whatever, the address to Congress. What is your response? And is your response going to get the same level of approval, especially if you're going against things that the American public actually agrees with, like ending the war? I mean, I've grown so sick of Sanders over the last several months. Not only were you too weak to win, not only were you a sheepdog claiming that Joe Biden is the second coming of FDR, which is just absurd, the big lie, as Sanders like to call it. But you are now vocally advocating, agitating against ending a war. You've lost the mission, bro. You've lost the mission. If you ever had in the first place. All right, I'm going to end this. Let me do this last one. The parasitic system is falling apart and killing the host. Yes. Yeah. When we're talking about this notion of sending jobs abroad, I mean, I think KJ and I disagreed on that, but sending jobs abroad. Okay, so this American worker who was making $20 an hour working at a factory had a company to send a job over to China because the company realizes, oh, I can pay that guy $3. I'm going to fire this American worker that was making $20 an hour. I'm going to pay this guy $3, and I'm going to ship the product back into the United States. And because I make some kind of trade deal, I'm not going to have to put any money in for shipping it in. That is $17 a profit. Great for me. Okay, well, what about the American worker that just lost their jobs? What about that guy who can't buy that product now that you're selling back into the country? It's like, yeah, somebody can go to Walmart and buy a cheap product for $5, but that guy just lost his job. Donald Trump with the tariffs is effectively trying to force those companies to come back into the United States, or at the very least, I don't know, come up with some kind of trade negotiation or whatever. But let's be honest, it's been like 50 years. And a country that has kind of accommodated that, are they going to be willing to pay more for their products across the board in the way that these tariffs are going to effectively force them to pay more across the board? Those questions, I don't have answers. Let's see, one last one. I think I read this one. Epstein's videotapes are so incriminating to many powerful people that releasing them would be damaging to many among the ruling class. Agreed. I don't care. Release them. Like this idea that because you're rich, you get to have sex with kids. It's nonsense. Nonsense. If a poor pedophile can go to jail, a rich pedophile should be able to go to jail too, right? The issue is having sex with kids, not the wealth. I agree with you that that may, in fact, be the reason why the list is not going to be released. But Ken Delaney arguing that there's no list seems to be nonsense. Or at the very least, we have to redefine what Epstein is, if there is indeed no list. I think this is Kaban. Europe is built on finance capitalism, not industry. That's why Europe can't challenge Russia. They will get their ass handed to them. And yet, they're the loudest people in the room. And if they can't challenge Russia, they should shut the fuck up. That's where I'm at. Alexander G. A huge part of Trump's work is moving the Overton window, making people accept reality rather than false media narrative. I hope that this is something that carries over going forward. Like that there's an element in the primary political space that recognizes peace as an option and that the public would accept peace. I hope so. We'll see, I suppose. Mr. Ripley, Europe has 500 million people. Russia has 130 million. If Europe wants to win, they know what they need to do: mass conscription or negotiate. They're too stupid to negotiate. They're too stupid to negotiate. And what's her name is trying to build up, a $600 billion war fund? It's not just a war fund. They're going to have to train, military drills, exercises, factories, all of that stuff. And what does that stuff look like in the context of Europe? We're not talking about the country. The U.S. is one country. We can build a weapons manufacturing thing. What does it look like for a weapons manufacturing base in Europe? What does it look like for soldiers to be able to cross various lines? Europe has a lot of work to do. This is not something that they're going to do overnight. And the idea that von der Leyen points out, and we're going to build all of this to give to Ukraine as if this is something that's going to take place tomorrow. Trump is ending the war now. What are you talking about going into the future for like 10 years? It's nonsense. President Jafar, been missing a couple of shows, but for good reason. After 7 years of kidney failure, I finally had a successful kidney transplant. Your story has been an inspiration throughout my day. Oh, thank you, man. I do appreciate it. 7 years. I am on year 31. I'm on year 31. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. Oh, somebody gave one more. Arcane Eclectic. Epstein was a Mossad agent for over 30 years. If that is true, then there should be a list. That's my point about Kendallanian. Okay, I gotta go. If that's true, and he was the CIA and Mossad spook, where are the lists? Where are the Johns? Where are the Johns? I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. If you love this content, you find yourself coming back here every morning or often, please feel free to buy me a cup of coffee. You can support the work through PayPal, Patreon, or Super Chats, memberships. All of those things are accepted, appreciated. And again, before I leave, one more special note. Thank you for the 40K. 50K is the next objective. Jamal Thomas Morning Show 107 in the record books. Have a good one all.